pre-radiocarbon dating, the assumption was that, you had 30 or 40 or 50,000 years in order to come out of an ice age or get into an ice age. Once you had radiocarbon dating, it became apparent that no, it was much, much faster than that.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Grimerica Show. We are going to be chatting with the one and only Randall Carlson a little bit later. Not a whole lot later because, as usual, we talked to Randall for a shade over 3 hours. So we don't want to keep you guys too long, but packed with a bunch of stuff. But first, as always, Graham Holy Man Dunlop.
Hey, buddy. What, the Holy Man?
It was a listener request.
Oh, Holy, okay. All right. No problem. So, yeah, I just want to mention before we forget that this is on video. We recorded with Randall some slides, and so there's a video presentation of this. It'll be on YouTube's.
On the YouTubes, yeah. Not the regular YouTube, so there's going to be 2 YouTubes. I'll name something so I'll put a name in the video, like video.
So it won't have this, the video won't have this intro.
That's
but
right.
The audio version will have this intro. And of course the podcast version that goes out will have our little lazy ramblings here for about 15 or 20 minutes just to take care of some housekeeping and get some listeners involved. And then,
yeah, there is a video. It is worth checking out. I mean, it does get a little stagnant from time to time as we just get caught up in the conversation and forget to change slides. But, I mean, for the most part, a lot. There's a ton of information in the video for sure.
Yeah, what shocked me about the stuff that he was showing.
Switch back and forth like you were saying. It took me so long just to get it where I wanted it in the first time, like the thought of going in and starting hacking it up.
Is there any of Randall's head in there at all?
The first 20 minutes.
Okay. That's good.
The first 20 minutes is Randall's face, and then the rest is slideshow.
Yeah, there was some pretty interesting graphs in there that showed how.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like going back 100,000 years, or how long was some of the graphs? Were they going back a million years? I'm not sure.
I can't remember.
I'm getting our episodes mixed up.
It was like only up in the last, the climate has only been as stable as it is for the last
12,000 years.
12,000.
And that stability.
Before that, it was just fucking so erratic.
Place.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Like degrees by degrees every year.
That's what shocks me. So there's all this fear-mongering about climate change, and we're not being dogmatic.
Not every year. I suppose it would be like every 10 years or whatever those, I don't know what the delineations were. But
it could have been 50 or 100 years even. But
yeah, nothing compared to what we've got now.
It's super steady right now.
It almost looks like if you were watching somebody sing in the hospital, you would think that they died. If that was someone's heart rate monitor,
not quite.
They'll go like,
they're dying.
Boo, boo. Yeah, they're dying. They're fading fast. You're panicking.
Yeah. So we're not dogmatic about this. I mean, we know that we're not doing the environment any favors, and we're not saying that we're not causing some sort of change, right? I mean, and even Randall's not dogmatic about it. That's what I find. The people on this side of the argument, they're not saying there's nothing going on, right? It's just at what level, and that the models aren't working, and that they're not taking all these other things into account, like solar cycles and the history. Like Randall goes back and shows the history there.
No, they're just, I mean, the lack of actual science that goes into any of the people that claim to be doing climate science is just baffling. Or you know what it is? What it probably is just like specialization. They're looking at this in the atmosphere, and this guy's looking at that in the atmosphere, and no one's looking at it all. Go back to Easterbrook, too. I mean, the Don Easterbrook episodes talk about the same things.
Yeah. I mean, there's enough whistleblowers out there now, and there's enough scientists out there now showing this type of science that is skeptical of the fear-mongering, right, of the global warming. But I talked to my friend about it the other day, and she was like, well, I don't see what the motivation is for them. People have a hard time seeing, why are they purporting this so much, right? Why is there so much hype over this? They feel like it's got to be real then because it's not funded by any corporation or anything like that. But it's a bigger picture than that. It's a whole global scheme, and the taxes and the money being created and the control mechanism.
Oh, Bill Nye is driving me crazy. I just got to cut myself loose.
Well, this same friend said Bill Nye was very she likes him actually. She doesn't agree with the dogmatic part and some of the things he's doing.
If you're a fan of Bill Nye, you just gotta not talk to me.
No. But he made people, and when they're younger, when they watched him, get interested in science and get interested in all this stuff. He actually had some real pot when he had his own show back then or whatever.
It should be illegal to have more than one kid.
I know.
Did you know that there's more elderly people in Canada than there are children.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem. The last thing we need to be doing is having less than...
Well, then maybe people should be adopting from third world countries then.
Well, we're not going to get into that here. Nice try.
Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that I feel like...
I would be all for adopting from third world countries, by the way. Families adopting kids?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But we should still just be having at least 2 or 3 kids. We shouldn't be telling people at least not to, or we shouldn't be propagandizing people not to procreate when we're not even at sustainable reproduction numbers.
Right. In Canada, you're talking about.
In Canada, we're at like 1.7 or something like that. If it's less than 2 per couple, then you're not,
Yeah.
So
is that the way it works?
You're moving backwards.
I guess so, eh?
Yeah. 1.7 kids per family.
Yeah. And some other Western countries are even worse, right?
Yeah.
Like 1.5 or something. So, anyways, I find that the dogmatic side is the side that's propagating this whole fear about us causing global warming / climate change or whatever. I mean, we're not doing any good. Like, I'm not saying
/ global cooling.
Emissions are good.
Yeah, it's all
just,
bad. But right now it's all we got. We can't be anti-nuclear, anti-fossil fuels because wind ain't doing it. Wind ain't doing it, and I'm not a fan of let's take a step back from progress.
Right.
You can't just...
Well, I mean, something's going to come up. We're going to get to some free energy or something sooner
or maybe
later.
Something you get efficient enough that wind and stuff like that can work. But just right now, it's like it can't. And all the stuff that makes you think that it can, if you really dig into it, you're going to find out that it's all peppered with fucking fluff. And it can't.
Yeah.
If we shut off the plants and just tried to hope for wind and solar right now, your power is going to be pretty intermittent.
Yeah.
Anywho.
Yeah. Well, anyways, let's. I don't know. It's a little bit different than normal Randall talk because we've had Randall on a few times, and usually it's about his catastrophism. But this one was more focused on climate change, which was kind of cool.
We're gonna and this is gonna line up really well with next week's Fenton.
Yeah.
They kind of tie in well.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Yeah, it was a great one. So anyway, what do you got?
Well, I got a couple of reviews I thought we'd read and some spam.
Nah.
Part of the week.
You got me. You got me. That's the one thing I don't have prepared.
Ready?
So, yeah.
That's like twice.
I'll find one. This is the profound UFO quote of the week. I got my little document.
Remember when you weren't just going to do UFOs anymore?
What was I going to do again?
You were just going to do... you did a couple, I actually think you did a couple other quotes.
On consciousness or something like that?
Yeah, or something, yeah.
Okay, I got one. What I found was compelling evidence to claim that most of these aerial objects far exceeded the terrestrial technology of the era in which they were seen. I was forced to conclude that there is a great likelihood that Earth is being visited by highly advanced aerospace vehicles under highly intelligent control indeed. And that was Dr. Richard F. Haynes, retired NASA senior research scientist, Research Institute for Advanced Computer Science, 1998.
I need something subtle I can do for your gas.
What?
I need just something subtle. Like, how No Agenda has the bell?
Yeah.
There's something when you do a gas, little ding.
I thought you said gas. I thought, how did you hear me fart? I was just
you farted?
I thought, how did you hear that?
The studio is like a 36 cubic foot box. Actually, I think that'd only be like 6 foot by 6 foot.
Yeah,
that'd be no.
It's more like 100 foot cube, or no, 1,000 cubic feet.
Yeah, 10 by.
Which isn't much, 10 by 10 by 10.
Yeah, less than that. No, it's 8 by 8 by 8.
Really?
Yeah. Outside. Inside is less than that. This is probably closer to 7 by 7 by 7. So you're 49 is 350 minus 7 is 343.
Take away the table and all that. I've got like 3 feet behind me.
So it's actually like 350 cubic feet.
Yeah. All right. So, what else?
Oh, here, I'll do this.
Bingo, bango, social media.
Oh, you got some social media there?
Just a couple. Like I said, I don't want to do the intro too long, where the podcast's already 3.5 hours. So we have, on number 201, Patrick Jordan is a well-researched and well-educated, self-taught scholar academic. He's free-thinking and expressive because he loves what he's doing. He teaches what he's learning.
Wow.
Number 193, man, this show is great. So here's two on number... So these are both on episode, the one with the particle physicist.
Okay.
We have, hey guys, get Abby Martin on, please. Then we have,
I've tried.
hey guys, please don't have Abby Martin on. Everyone should also consider, by the Dudermensch. Everyone should also consider that, just like Jeremy Bentham's Pentopicon, mind control specialists wish you to be hyper-paranoid and self-censored. Note the mass media loved Snowden but never mentioned William Binney even once. The funniest is a statue of Snowden. Even though nothing changed, I looked into Horton's video about 6 months ago, and since I am no longer naive to the lengths intelligence agencies will go, I found quite a bit of nonsense in the first video I watched.
Huh.
Alan Collins, she is telling the truth. Please tell her, the UK crew. Okay, it's UK posse, not the UK crew. I so totally dig the awesome musicianship of the Slash support jingle. That's our buddy Felix, the King of Jingles. I accidentally called him the King of Shingles. Said, I hope you're not the King of Shingles. Unless you're a roofer, then you might want to be the King of Shingles. So I can hear it at 5 a.m. in the morning. Oompa, oompa, chinga, chinga, disco, go, closure. Go home, schmucks. You want to guess who sent that in?
No.
Yoni.
Oh, yeah.
Joni?
Of course.
Yoni? Yeah. Sounds like Fletcher has been listening to them. Steve Hackett, early Genesis. For the love of fucking God, please, Darren, call Graham's intro in with Graham Holy Man Dunlop.
Oh, there you go.
God bless.
All right, good way to end it.
Actually, I'll play the jingle for Joni, and then we'll ask for support.
No, I got stuff to read too.
We could start. What are you gonna?
Okay.
For social media?
No, okay.
I don't know if I have that jingle. Oh, here it is.
If they make you laugh, if they make you cry, if they blow your mind, why not go online to Grimerica.ca/support?
Thank you very much.
I like that one.
It's so good. Yeah, all the Felix ones are good.
Yeah.
I don't have the other one on the thing handy yet, but what I'll do is I'm going to play out the episode with the good vibes.
Did you get the jingle I forwarded you that I didn't listen to, just so our listener knows it sent it in from...
Which one? How long ago?
From Garrett Lee, I think, from our chat.
Just recently?
Yeah. He doesn't listen. Garrett, people, if you got jingles, and you probably should just send them to Darren, because he doesn't read my emails. So if I forward it to you, he probably just ignores it.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it, and you can do the support spiel this week.
No, I got some reviews I wanted to share.
Okay, fine. Do that then.
So we got a couple of reviews here. This is from... I just wanted to mention it because this really helps, I think, these iTunes reviews. This is from Tunit Moreno. The guys managed to talk about... And it's a 5-star review, of course. Thank you. The guys managed to talk about controversial issues without being polarizing. They always have really interesting guests and ask great questions. They don't take themselves too seriously, which is refreshing. If you like weirdness and strange stuff with a tad of conspiracy thrown in for fun, this is for you. And then the next one, and his title was funny and interesting. The next one is This Show Is Out There, and that's from Kilanola. It's like being on a mind-expanding consciousness trip each week, but you go to work right after, no hangover, too. So thanks for the reviews, guys. And I do have a spam there if you want to... I'm saving all the trip reports and some synchronicities for the next intro where we got some more time. But
Not a whole lot more time.
This is from Mary.
2 hours and 45 minutes with Fenton.
Yeah, this is from Mary Beth. She says, hey guys, just here to dangle my $3.33 in front of you to remind you of the clout that entitles me to. I'm kidding. I wanted to let you know that you guys have been killing it lately. The past 5 or so episodes have been fascinating. At any rate, I love all the synchros, trip reports, lucid dream stories, and the way you reach out and engage your listeners. It's truly unique and endearing. It's difficult to find people in your personal life to discuss these topics with. I love, too, much to the annoyance of my coworkers and husband, I share my dreams. I feel especially obligated to share it if they are in it. When Graham was telling Cyrus the way his dreams sometimes affect his disposition throughout the day, I was like, yes, me too. My dreams are like 70% emotional and 30% visual.
50 cents, Dad.
They can leave a long-lasting impression on me. I remember more the way I felt than what I saw. I know it seems silly, but some dreams can stick with me the whole day. Maybe keeping a journal would help? What do you do? Graham, I hope you had a great time in the Sunshine State. I wonder if it's as weird to be a tourist as it is to be native. And Darren, your dry sense of humor is Canadian national treasure. I don't have cable, TV, Netflix, Hulu, etc. I basically only watch/listen to podcasts and documentaries on my phone. But that's okay. I've got you guys, JRE, and others to keep me entertained.
There's a bunch. We should post our podcast list someday, somewhere.
Yeah, I don't have any suggestions for guests. I like being exposed to unfamiliar people and would rather let you guys have carte blanche to express yourselves. It's your show and your vision. I'm just here for moral and insignificant financial support. Cheers.
It's not insignificant.
Yeah, it helps a lot.
If everyone gave $3.33, we'd have
actually
a studio, a real studio that wasn't in a garage. We could do a couple podcasts a week because we wouldn't have to go work anymore.
Yeah, the investment might be paid off too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we put a little bit more into this than we planned. We didn't really have a very good business plan.
No.
And what was I going to say about marketing? Oh, yeah, it's good to hear how you guys found the show as well, because that's pretty much our only market research.
Hey, and if you live in, like, Calgary or Canada, maybe if you live in Alberta and you're an accountant or anything like that, email me. Because we don't have a ton of support, but, there's enough people supporting the show now that I worry that we should be. Your accountant, just email me.
Yeah.
Support the show.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have any ads or any sponsorship. Like, you guys are our sole funding.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
And Graham's Visa.
And, well, yeah.
Used to be.
Yeah, it used to be.
Before we wrecked it.
Yeah. Before I maxed it out.
Before we broke it. So check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. There's a bunch of, a ton of ways to support the show that don't cost you any money. 9 out of 10 ways to support the show are free, whether that's reviewing the show wherever you can, sharing the show wherever you can, sending in your stories, your trip reports, your synchros, all that stuff.
P.O. Box?
The P.O. Box, there's a contact page, Grimerica.ca/contact.
Yeah, we got a great postcard recently from a listener, actually at night of the No Agenda Roundtable 2 from Vancouver Island, and it was a Sasquatch on a paddleboard, and he donated $33.33. Thank you very much.
Kyle,
you are.
Kyle brought us a postcard from Roswell.
Oh, where's that?
It's still in my truck.
Oh, of course. Well, it'll never make it to the studio.
It's gone.
It's in the truck with the rest of the people
Kyle will never hear this. So. Unless he's closet listening.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. We should actually put the Honey Doobie Do list onto the support page at the bottom. So it's all there.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then everything will be on the support page. But yeah, if you can, when you can is all we ask. What else you got, buddy?
That's it.
That's it. Right around 20 minutes. That's probably good.
Yeah, I think that's it. Just enjoy this great chat with Randall. We get into some crazy stuff at the end a little bit. We switch gears and then we go back. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, it gets a little hairy at points, but it's good. It's good because we get into a ton of stuff that we've never even come close to talking about with Randall yet. So. Yeah,
and it's always good to remember that we have to keep in mind what's happened in the past and how catastrophe has struck, and the Earth has changed a lot fast. Yeah. So, and we're sitting here worried about this this insignificant temperature fluctuation when, we could be blown away any day by a fucking asteroid or...
Well, Fenton thinks within the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a downer.
Yeah.
I was thinking, should I get some canned food? Because I feel like we're in a spot that'll probably be okay this time. I think that's why they're building all those hotels up by the airport.
Yeah. Well, we're at high level. I mean, we've got big sky here.
We got big sky.
We're safe that way.
We're a mile high.
Yeah.
Might not be any food.
I was thinking about ordering one of those prep things.
Start sending spam to the P.O. box so we can stockpile it in here.
Hey, actually, we still got some spam up there.
We got spam. We got
Real
a bunch
spam.
of teriyaki spam that someone shipped from Hawaii. It must have cost a fucking fortune. I was looking at going to Hawaii, and it's fucking insane.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It probably costs like $300 to ship that spam.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, enjoy the chat with the one and only Randall Carlson.
All right, we're back for this very special episode with an old favorite of the show, Randall Carlson. And we've also got Cyrus here to help us out with this one. He's a friend of Grimerica. Oh, I'm losing my voice all of a sudden.
Good timing.
Good timing. So Randall's been here before. He's a rogue scholar. We talked about sacred geometry, catastrophism, geology. We're going to be getting into climate change. He's going to be on Joe Rogan again coming up on May 16th. That should be a really interesting show. And before we lose our chance to plug some of his stuff, go to Sacred Geo International. Put links in the show notes. They've got sales on the DVDs and their classes. And it's Cosmic Patterns and Cycles of Catastrophe. And there's 33% off with the coupon code Grimerica. Now, they're raising money for a podcast. They're going to be launching like a Gnosis series of nice little tidbits, 20, 30 minutes of Randall. You'll get like all the Randall you can handle as soon as they raise enough money. So everybody head to the site, Sacred Geometry International, and help out these guys. So anyways, before too long there, Randall, it's good to have you back. Thanks for all your patience getting all set up here.
Well, it's great to be back, and thanks. I think we've got a new tagline here: all the Randall you can handle.
Yeah,
I like that one too. That works for me.
I think this is episode 5.
It replaces Randall the Vandal, anyway.
Right on.
So, yeah, I mean, how many times, what is this, the third time on your show? Fourth time?
This is 5.
5.
That's right.
And 2 are in studio.
2 are in studio, right. Yeah, I got good memories of that. Being up there hanging with you guys.
Absolutely.
What was that? Summer before last? When was that?
That was the summer before last, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Summer before last, so 2015, right?
That's right. That was a fun little trip.
And lots happened since then. Like you've, I meant to mention at the beginning here too that your work's been mentioned in Graham Hancock's book Magician of the Gods since that trip.
Since that trip, right?
Yeah. And
because I guess, let's see, was that before or after I spent a couple of weeks with him on the road? He was doing research on the catastrophism and the floods and stuff. So I think that was
after. No, that would have been after.
Oh, after, okay.
Because it was the summer
but you
right
were
after
on
the
before,
paradigm.
though, too.
Yeah.
He was on before, too. That's right.
Right.
And actually,
hopefully we can do it again later this summer because there's still a lot of work to do up in that area, putting the pieces together, especially since it's getting out there a little bit more now. It's, I'm sure it's going to get challenged by some of the mainstream defenders. So, I would like to make sure that I've got all the pieces in place, although that probably will never happen because it's such a complex, massive scenario to try to decipher. But and plus, not only the interest of solving a mystery like this, but just being in that country is just, it makes it for me. It just psychologically, I'm like a different person when I get out of the city and I'm out there in the big sky country and the mountains and the rivers and the forests and the meadows. Yeah, that's an element right there.
I've been back and forth to Lake Louise 6 times in the last 2 weeks.
6 times in 2 weeks?
No, maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But,
because you guys were putting up that canopy over there on the
yeah.
Is it making you realize how beautiful it is out here, Darren?
You know, by the last time I was sick of it.
Really?
The last trip I was just like, oh my God, it's so far. But
really
yeah, the
only
first
2
year, I
hours.
mean, you can't really ask for a better commute.
The problem is the road, the speed limit between Banff and Lake Louise is 90 kilometers, and there's lots of cars. That's really painfully slow.
That's slow, yeah.
So we've been hearing a lot about this in the news lately. There's been those carvings that people were like, it was going all over the place, and it seemed to match exactly what you've been talking about.
Well, yeah, and I haven't really had a chance to go through the whole analysis to see how credible it is. I mean, certainly I've seen the gist of it, and it certainly does support the scenario we've been working on. But, again, until I've gone through it myself, I don't know whether the connections are spurious or whether it really, is believable. I'm just going to have to go through it. I have the article. I've printed out that appeared in the Mediterranean Archaeology Journal, and again, like I said, I've not yet gone through it. I will. I've been focusing lately on just trying to understand the controversies surrounding the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, because that has ignited a storm of controversy since it was first proposed in 2007, which is an idea that I've been working on for probably close to a quarter of a century. But even that trip I did out there when I was in Canada in 1999 was looking for field evidence that the melting of the ice was possibly triggered by some type of a cosmic impact. So I was working on that at least by then. And I had actually formulated, I think the idea initially in the late 80s or early 90s, but didn't start getting out in the field until the late 90s to actually see if there was anything in the field that could verify or refute the idea. And everything that I found convinced me that, the melting, the scale of the melting was phenomenal. The scenario of a big lake in western Montana, Lake Missoula, being held in by an ice dam, I found increasing amounts of field evidence that were inconsistent with that scenario. So, again, the conventional scenario being that there was this huge lake somewhere between 525 and 600 and some cubic miles in volume, depending on whose research you look at, held in by an ice dam. It was 2,100 feet deep in the area right there at the border of Montana and Idaho in the Clark Fork Valley. Somewhere in there was the glacial ice dam lake water interface, according to the conventional theory. And at that point, the water in the Clark Fork Valley was over 2,000 feet deep, which in my readings and discussions with civil engineers and with glaciologists and so forth, seems to me to be a thoroughly untenable idea, because when we look at modern examples of ice-dammed lakes, they're utterly minuscule compared to, the scenario of Lake Missoula. Now, some people apparently have listened to some of the things that I've said and misconstrued, saying, well, what are you saying, that there was no lake because there were shorelines there? And I've seen those shorelines, 100 times, photographed them. I followed the shorelines throughout the basin of Lake Missoula. But, the question is when it goes back to the original research in the 1920s and 1930s by J. Harlan Bretz, most of the objections In fact, all of the objections to the mega flood theory was that, you can't provide a source for the water on the scale required for this erosional complex that you're looking at in Washington called the Channel Scabland. And since you don't have a source for the water, then the floods didn't happen. What happened, of course, eventually was that J.T. Pardee, who worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, was surveying these mountain basins in the Clark Fork River watershed in western Montana. And, first of all, found way back in 1910, found the shorelines on the mountainsides, particularly the ones around the Missoula Basin. You can actually see the shorelines quite prominently from the University of Montana campus. And he also looked at these sediments on the valley floor throughout the basin, and they were, typical alluvial deposits, thick alluvial deposits, which led him to believe that there had been a lake. He drew upon the idea first put out by geologist T.C. Chamberlain back in about 1896, I think it was, that there had been, who had also seen the shorelines and theorized that there had been a great glacial lake held in by an ice dam somewhere to the west. And so J.T. Pardee picked up on that idea, and this was in the, like I said, 1910. It was his first ever scientific paper that he published as a young geologist. The last paper he did as a professional geologist, 1942 or 43, right in there, was the follow-up paper on Lake Missoula. It was entitled Unusual Currents in Glacial Lake Missoula, which I find an interesting phrase to use, unusual currents, because what made them unusual was because in the interim between 1910 and the early 1940s, he had discovered the gigantic ripple fields that he didn't know about back in 1910. So this is what led him to coin the phrase unusual currents, because when you have a ripple field that's 10 miles long and current ripples that are, composed of boulders that are 30, 40, 50 feet in height and 200 to 300 feet in wavelength, the current that would create such current ripples could be characterized as unusual. So, basically, I questioned this scenario. I questioned, is it possible that there could be that much water held in by a 100% stable glacial ice dam? And the more I looked at it, the more implausible the scenario seemed to me. And because as I learned about glacial ice, I realized, you've got basically a continuum of glaciers that go from a very solid, stable polar glacier all the way to a temperate glacier that's riding upon a layer of water that's literally on the base of the ice sheet. And the temperate glaciers themselves are, filled with fractures and cracks and apertures that reach from the surface all the way to the base of the ice that are called moulins. There's interstitial network cavities. So, water, glacial ice is not a material that would be conducive to retaining water at any significant pressure. So, but in order to fill a basin to a depth of 2,100 feet, that works out to be about 960 some pounds per square inch at the base of the ice dam. And if you think about that, that's in the north. Think about 900, and it works out to be, I think, right around between 60 and 70 tons per square foot, which is about the weight of a Sherman tank. So imagine that you've got a cubic block of ice, and you set the weight of a Sherman tank on it. How which is going to win, obviously. So that was my point, is that, wait a second, you guys are just, you've accepted this idea that there was an ice dam. It's been perpetuated and repeated over and over and over and over again. Nobody has really gone into the question, is this even a plausible scenario? And when you go to look in the field, what you discover, here's what I think they did. They took the source of Bretz's floodwater, put it into western Montana, and said there was this big lake here, 500 to 600 cubic miles of water. Right? Okay, now, at the same time, you've got this ice mass, which has to be 100% stable in order to retain the water to that kind of pressure, right? But in order to have that stable ice mass, you have to have a polar climate. But if you've got a polar climate, then where the hell is all this water coming from? The water can only be coming from rainfall or meltwater. There's no other source, rainfall or meltwater. Either one of those or any combination of those implies the climate that's quite warm, which is completely inconsistent with the idea of a stable polar ice mass. The implication is that you have to have a temperate glacier, and a temperate glacier is going to be completely incapable of holding water back to any significant pressures. And then when we look at modern examples, that's exactly what we see. We see glacial outburst floods up in British Columbia, Alaska, Iceland. They're very prominent. And what you see there is that these reservoirs of water that are literally less than a 1,000th the volume of Lake Missoula will break through their ice dams when they get to be between roughly 100 and 300 feet thick or deep. And at that point, the ice can no longer retain the water in that pressure. It forces its way through the ice. The ice fails. The water flows out in an outburst flood. In the Icelandic term, it's Jökulhlaups. And then the lake drains. Sometimes the ice will reseal, the lake will refill, and then they call them self-dumping glacial lakes. So what the geologists have done is they have taken that scenario of modern glacial lakes, modern outburst floods, and scaled up by 3 orders of magnitude and said, well, yeah, we understand it's a big extrapolation, but that's the model we're going to invoke here to explain this. I'm coming along and I'm saying, well, what you guys have done is you've put all of this water into western Montana. So you said, okay, first of all, Francis floods couldn't happen because you didn't have a source of the water. Then here comes the idea of a glacial lake, and they say, oh, okay, good, great. Okay, now we have a modern example, a uniformitarian, consistent with the uniformitarian principle, which is that we try to explain all past geological change by reference to modern phenomena. All we got to do is extrapolate it up by 3 orders of magnitude, and boom, we've got an explanation. But what they have really done, you see, is they have just pushed they've kicked the can down the road, so to speak. Because while Brett's couldn't come up with a source for the water, Pardee comes up and says, okay, here's this lake. So everybody jumps on okay, here's this big lake in western Montana. But nobody's asking the question I've been asking for a quarter of a century. Where the hell did that water come from? You see, and so in the travels that we've done and in the things that we did together summer before last, what I was doing was documenting irrefutable evidence that the water came out of British Columbia, that it flowed down these north-south trending valleys, such as the Rocky Mountain Trench, which we crossed together, the Columbia Valley, the Purcell Trench, all of these valleys that anybody listening who wants to look on Google Earth, you could see those valleys. They were all filled with huge volumes of ice. That ice is now gone. There was no place for it to go when it melted except to drain south into western Montana and over eastern Washington. So then the question becomes, when you begin to understand the scale of these floods, the phenomenal, unbelievable scale of these floods, is that, well, if they're produced by sudden, catastrophic, rapid melting, then we have to have some kind of an agency that can provoke that kind of melting. And that's where you come into, well, what terrestrial source of energy is? There's not volcanic, because that kind of energies would not exist in the area of the Cordilleran ice sheet over southern British Columbia. But the thing is, is that at the same time that this was going on, you had massive melting of the Laurentide ice sheet as well, that's centered over eastern Canada and Hudson Bay. And so in a lot of the other journeys that I've done, I've visited or traversed various river valleys that have headed onto the ice sheet, such as, the Missouri and the Mississippi and the St. Croix and the Ohio and the Mississinewa and a number of others. And in every single case, you can see the evidence of catastrophic meltwater flows completely submerging these valleys. And so these were going on at the same time that the Missoula floods were going on. And to me, it's like you got to find a common explanation for all of this. And this is what seems to have eluded a lot of the guys that are doing this work, because they're still clinging to this. Because for one thing, once you begin to look at the vast scale of the erosion and sedimentary features that were left in the wake of these floods, they're so vast and they're so complex that the original scenario of one gigantic flood coming from a point source, which was the mouth of the Clark Fork River in the area of Lake Pend Oreille in northern Idaho, could not explain the vast scale and complexity of these. So they began to add more and more floods to the, to the whole model until now it's up to like 89 floods, which they're saying basically, okay, so 89 times the ice dam formed, filled the lake, and then the lake broke out. And I'm saying, well, no, the scenario of even one lake filling to 2,100 feet deep is implausible. 89 times is ridiculous. And they basically are doing that by looking at varves, backflood varves that are backwash varves that are found in some of the contiguous valleys like the Sanpoil River and the John Day River and others. And I've studied those and looked at those, and I think that basically we have to understand this melting is actually, there's two regimes. There is this catastrophic rapid meltdown, which created literal freshwater tsunamis gushing off the ice sheet. In the wake of that, there was substantial climate changes that brought the planet out of the ice age, which is part of the mystery we're still trying to figure out. But you basically have to get rid of a total of about 6 million cubic miles of ice mantling North America between 14,000 and about 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. And I think it was done basically in two scales of events. Once or twice, you had this massive instantaneous melting of huge volume, maybe tens of thousands or even several 100,000 cubic miles of ice converted instantly into water. Then, in the aftermath of that, you had a bunch of residual ice that melted away over the next couple of few thousand years. And I think that what's happened is the mainstream looking at this has not been able to, has not differentiated between these two flood regimes. That you have one where you might have literally, like in the Camas Prairie region of western Montana, that's where you've got this ripple train that's almost 10 miles long, and you've got these massive current ripples that are 30 to 50 feet in amplitude and 200 to 300 feet in wavelength. There, the water flow through Camas Prairie, and anybody listening to this that wants to go look on Google Earth, I'll pull up some images here in a minute. You'll be able to see this, what I'm talking about, this massive ripple field. Here's what you got to picture, and this is the thing that's virtually impossible to picture, but when you're standing there in the field, that's the best way to try to get some sense of what we're talking about here. But you would have a river. Picture this. You got a river that's moving 50 to 60 miles an hour. It's 10 to 11 miles wide and 1,400 feet deep. Now, there's nothing even remotely close to that happening on Earth today. Not even remotely close. So when we're talking about events like that, the uniformitarian principle only can go so far to explain that. Clearly that level of melting is something beyond anything in our modern experience.
Yeah, regardless of what caused it, right? That image that you guys have on the screen, so for people that are watching on video or whatever, that looks like an image of what the ice was like back then, like say 14,000 years ago over North America and Europe. Yeah. So, just look at, no matter what caused that twice, like melting it in two stages, that puts everything into perspective for sure as far as, climate change nowadays compared to climate change back then. Look at how most of North America is covered and most of Europe. Where does that go down in Europe to to France
It covers all of Scandinavia, and it reaches down into what is now the British Isles, which of course at that time was not the British Isles because the North Sea didn't exist. Wow. Because with that much ice accumulated on the land surface, it dropped ocean levels worldwide about 400 feet. 400 feet. And this is why there was this is why North America and Asia were a continuous landmass during this time. And click to the next, I'll go to the next image here, and you can see there, you look up there, you'll see Alaska, and you'll see that the land bridge is actually more massive than the state of Alaska. It's not some narrow little strip of land. It's a massive, huge swath of land that is now underwater. And that was also highly densely populated with megafauna. There was a lot of woolly mammoths and Columbian mammoths and Mammothus imperator, these great, proboscideans that lived during the end of the Ice Age, which, of course, now they're completely extinct. So, yeah, when you realize that there was that much ice, and then at this point there is no agreed-upon explanation for what happened to that ice, how the world could so quickly transition from the ice full glacial age into the interglacial age that we're in now. And when you go back in Earth history and you realize that this has happened multiple times throughout the entire Pleistocene, which is a little over 2.5 million years in length, you've got to go, well, wait a second. If we don't understand climate changes of that magnitude and that severity that have happened regularly in Earth history, how can we possibly say that the debate on climate change is now settled?
Exactly.
Simple question. That's the question I ask, and I never get an answer to it. Usually what it is usual response is to ignore me, run out of the room, or call me a name, come up with some insults. You're just a climate change denier. You're a Trump-supporting climate change denier.
Well, they're intellectually impotent. They can't keep up, so they start yelling and they start name-calling it, and then they overtalk you. They don't let you get your information out there because your information's threatening.
It is threatening. It's threatening to some agendas that are now being pushed with a lot of people trying to get this idea out there that now the sole cause of climate change is human activity. And
like Bill Nye the Science Guy and his butt stuff song that he's got out now.
Yeah, listen, Bill Nye, I tell you, I don't know even what to think about that guy. He's really a joke.
Well, I grew up in Seattle. He was an actor on a local TV show here called Almost Live, and he had a character that was called Speed Walker. That was his superhero power. He speed walked and caught his villains, and he stopped a guy from stealing the Space Needle once. But that character never really caught. But Bill Nye the Science Guy kind of caught on a little bit, and then he just took that ball and ran with it. He's not a scientist. Never was a scientist. He was an engineer at Boeing, yes. But scientist, no. He's just shooting off propaganda because it signs his check for him.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. He's in with the group now, and you'll hear him say things like, I guess was it one of the interviews he did recently, maybe with Tucker Carlson or somebody, where he was saying, yes, well, we scientists, we believe this. Like he's now a spokesman for this, completely consistent authoritarian body where everybody is in, omniscient body of scientists that are all in agreement. And anybody who questions, any portion of that agreement, is now a climate change denier or in the payroll of the fossil fuel industry. And, I am waiting for my first check. When it comes, I will probably have some very interesting things to spend it on, but I'm not going to hold my breath. When Cameron and I actually went to a coffee house presentation, 6-7 years ago by one of Al Gore's public relations guys, right, was here in Atlanta. And it was so funny because, we're sitting in the audience and Cameron, then when it kind of came to the questions and comments, Cameron raises his hand and he says, well, now, do you understand that, Al Gore's company, Generation Investment Management, stands to make a lot of money if cap and trade is put in place? And immediately somebody who's sitting right up there next to the speaker, obviously fawning over this, speaker that worked for Al Gore, immediately turns and says to the whole crowd, well, we obviously have a ringer in the audience. By that, he meant, that obviously Cameron was a plant and was getting paid off by fossil fuels. Yeah, that was the fellow who runs this desmog blog. But that just kind of shows the mindset of how they get around anything. They didn't answer or even address the question Cameron raised. It was just like, oh, he's a ringer, obviously a ringer, so let's not pay any attention to that guy, you know. And I thought I found that so amusing, and I'm thinking, Cameron is a ringer, okay. Yeah, well, you never told me, Cameron, that you were on the payroll of the fossil fuel industry. But I'm afraid that's just all too typical. And so the whole strategy is to shut down debate because, you know, there is many questions, unresolved questions about climate change. And, you know, I've been for years advocating the idea that, yeah, the climate changes profoundly over and over again. That's why I find it so ridiculous that somebody calls me a climate change denier. You know, because I've been, you know, I got interested in climate change literally about 1975. And I began to do research which was known, you know, what was known at that point, particularly about paleoclimatology. Was very interested even from the time I was a kid. And, you know, growing up in Minnesota, right where we lived was near the margin of the Great Ice Sheet, the Laurentide Ice Sheet, the southern margin. So the geomorphic effects of the glacier age was everywhere about where I grew up as a kid. And so I got really fascinated by that whole phenomena very young. And by the time I was in my mid-20s, it almost became an obsession. So I began going through the literature. In my archives, I've got probably somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 articles on various aspects of climate change that I have and read the lion's share of them. That's why I find it quite amusing when somebody says, well, what do the real scientists think? You know, well, which scientists do you want to talk about here?
Exactly.
You know?
So what are some of your big questions? What are some of your big questions that you have for them then?
Who, me?
Yeah, like you have a couple, you said you have a couple like big questions for the climate changes that aren't being answered. Like, do you have some information there too with you, like presentation wise, as far as like some of the outstanding sort of issues that aren't being dealt with?
Well, you know, the outstanding thing to me is this oscillation between glacial and interglacial ages, which feel is extremely important for us to understand, because when we look at the paleoclimatological record that goes back a couple of 100,000 years now, based upon oxygen isotope analysis of ice cores extracted from Greenland and Antarctica, from mountain glaciers, from deep sea cores, from speleothems in caves, from palynological studies, which is the study of pollen, studies of biological and vegetation changes. All of these things put together suggest that there are basically two regimes of change that this planet that describes the totality of change on planet Earth. And one is the kind of degree of change that we've seen in the last 7,000 to 10,000 years in the post-Ice Age era, which is called the Holocene. And then that's punctuated on a fairly regular basis by change that is orders of magnitude greater than the background pace of what we would consider normal change. And it's that, you know, those discontinuities, those points of discontinuity, those event nodes, if you will, that have intrigued me for so long. Like, what is it that suddenly kicks the planet into a whole new mode? You know, because when you begin to understand how dramatically different the planet was during the late Wisconsin period, you know, from 14,000 years ago down to about 25 or 30,000 years ago, and you begin to understand how vastly different the planet was and how quickly it changed from that to what it is now.
Yeah.
You go, okay, well, there's something going on here, and we haven't identified it yet, and it seems to happen repeatedly throughout the history of the planet. And when we begin to reconstruct the paleoclimatological record, and we look at these periods of interglacial warmth, such as we have enjoyed for the last 10,000 years, what soon becomes apparent is that, you know, that periods of interglacial warmth, as long as the one we're in now, are the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Most of them are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years, and then there's a major climate spasm. So, you know, to me, it's like, okay, well, do we just go merrily along, assuming that, you know, this is the way it's going to always be? Or are there times, you know, when things shift quite rapidly, and it seems that there is. So then the question is given that, you know, the period of the Holocene that we're in now is basically a duration longer than virtually any other period of interglacial warmth we've seen, then it seems to me the prudent thing is to ask, well, why? What is this mechanism? And until we understand what the mechanism is, we're not going to be able to predict. And so, see, the thing is I'm not against us learning about the effects of human beings on climate, not by a long shot. And somehow people think that, they get that impression. On the other hand, what I'm trying to do is to say, well, yeah, humans are one variable in a very complicated equation. Carbon dioxide is one variable in a very complicated equation, but it's not the thing driving climate. And if we come back here and we start looking at some of the graphs that I have, you'll be able to see some of the things that I'm talking about.
Isn't it true, though, a lot of these models that are going for the climate change people who are promoting the fact that mankind's killing the planet, they're going off the fact that we've only been keeping track of the temperature for less than 200 years, right?
Yeah, the instrumental temperature. Yeah, and even there, you go back to the 19th century and our access to temperature data was very sparse, because and it's very difficult to go back to like 19th and early 20th century temperature data and extrapolate to the planet as a whole. Really, the temperature data we've got that we can rely on, it gives us the planet as a whole is basically since the late 70s and the 80s when we started getting satellite data in.
I remember that being a big point to me when the first time I heard you start talking about it. I never thought about that and never really, I guess I never even knew when we started keeping track of the temperature. Mm-hmm. But you could study back thousands and thousands of years in the Greenland ice cores, and they're telling us that this ball that we live on is constantly changing. It flows up, it goes down. In the 70s, like when you said you started getting really into this stuff, didn't they think we were going into another ice age?
Yeah, and in a way you almost could understand why they would think that, because number one, radiocarbon dating came along in the early 1950s. And by the early to mid 70s, there was enough. The database of radiocarbon dates was extensive enough. But looking at it, it became obvious that the time frame for these changes was a whole lot quicker than anybody had imagined pre-radiocarbon dating. Whereas pre-radiocarbon dating, the assumption was that you had 30 or 40 or 50,000 years in order to come out of an ice age or get into an ice age. Once you had radiocarbon dating, it became apparent that no, it was much, much faster than that. Rather than 30 or 40 or 50,000 years, you're looking at 4 or 5 or 6,000 years. And even within that framework of 3 or 4 or 5,000, 6,000 years, there were periods, very short periods of maybe a few centuries or even a few decades where the bulk of the change was concentrated. And I've got up on the screen here now the oxygen isotopes in Greenland. And let's look at that. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got relative oxygen isotope ratios, and I won't necessarily get into explaining how that works, other than the fact that when you look at this squiggly line, shifts to the left mean the temperature is getting cooler, shifts to the right mean that the temperature is getting warmer. Down the right side of the scale, you see the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it jumps down to 10. That's the time in thousands of years before present. So at the bottom where you see that number 10, that was 10,000 years ago. Over on the left, you see 0 at the top, 1,500 at the bottom. That's the depth of the ice. So at 1,500 meters, which is, close to a mile in depth, you've gone back 10,000 years. Oxygen isotope ratios are an indication of the ambient temperature. If you look at that squiggly line, what it's doing is it's showing constant fluctuations in the temperature of 2 to 4 degrees, right? Back and forth. If you look down, which would actually at about 8,200 years, what you'll see is that there's a pretty major spike off to the left.
Mm-hmm.
That was a cooling period of about where the climate suddenly cooled about 4 degrees, minus 4 degrees. I'm going to go to another slide here, and you can see if you go down, you'll
dive at like 10,000 years too.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that. You see the 8,200 year ago cold event? I've got an arrow pointing right to that little squiggle that comes off to the left. That's about a 4 degree. Then if you go down just below that, along that vertical yellow bar, you see that's the climatic optimum, first phase. The vertical line represents the modern day temperature. And what you're going to see is that this graph shows the temperature of the northern hemisphere. And even though this is Greenland ice sheet, it's likely that it does represent a hemispherical shift in temperature. You're going to see that the climate is oscillating back and forth around that line. You'll also notice that towards the bottom during the climatic optimum, it's actually warmer. And now I'm going to take that same graph. I'm going to flip it horizontal. And let's see. Okay, so here I've done a green line, which is, here's the green line, which is roughly modern day temperature. And what you're going to see is as you go back almost to that 10,000 years, you're going to see that the squiggle, if you took out that spike pointing downward, which is the 8,200 year ago cold snap, it's pretty much above the green line. And then as it comes down towards like at 5,000 years, 4,000 years, you see the numbers up at the top. Those are thousands of years. You'll notice two things. You're going to notice that the trend line is decreasing. So I'll go here. This graph shows the trend line, and you can actually see the green trend line. What we've had is a steady cooling throughout the last 10,000 years. As the climate has cooled, you'll also see from this graph that the magnitude of the oscillations back and forth has increased. It hasn't decreased. It's increased along with the cooling. So getting back to the question that I think Cyrus was posing about is that when you look at this, what you realize is that the temperature has been cooling, and this became apparent when radiocarbon dating started coming online in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. And, there was evidence that's coming out showing that, well, wait a second, 40 to 50,000 years ago, when we thought that Canada was completely buried in ice, there were forests growing where the ice was 10,000 years later. So what that did was it constrained the duration of this whole process, going from an interglacial to an ice age and back to an interglacial again. And so at the same time that they realized that, there was what's called the little 20th century, mid-20th century cooling. Now, when we come into the 20th century, we're coming out of the little ice age. We'll go to that in a minute here, and we'll talk about that little ice age, because the baseline for the measuring modern temperature change is one of the coldest periods throughout the entire Holocene. But so what happened is you had the little cooling that lasted from the 50s and 60s and the 70s. And maybe it cooled as much as a half a degree after the initial warming of the early 20th century. You know that the warmest decade of the whole 20th century was the 1930s, not the 1990s.
That's when we had the Dust Bowl?
Yes, when we had the Dust Bowl. That was the warmest decade of the 20th century.
We had Dr. John Easterbrook on, and he actually maintains that his original graphs from the 60s and 70s still show the 30s as being hotter than even anything to date. But he says they have been manipulated, and they're not showing the real information anymore.
Yes, and Don Easterbrook is completely correct on that.
We'll link to that episode in the show notes if people want to go back and brush up on that one.
Yes, and Don Easterbrook is a very distinguished scientist who knows what he's talking about.
And if you are listening to the audio, you got to see these graphs. So as soon as you can, watch this on YouTube.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah,
like most of Randall's stuff.
Yeah, they really tell the story.
Yeah, you can see there's a heating trend around 2,000 years ago. There's that spike on the right as well.
I wonder if they were complaining about fossil fuels then.
Yeah, well, when did they start driving SUVs? It was somewhere, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
Jesus had
I think
one.
when...
Noah had one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing to understand here, to sum it up, is that you had the mid 20th century cooling between the 50s and the 70s happening at the same time they realized that interglacial periods were really short-lived. So it was natural to speculate, well, let's see. We've already exceeded what appears to have been the length of all of the earlier interglacial periods, and the climate is cooling. What does that mean? Of course, here's the big difference. When the 80s came along, then we started warming again. Now, whether that warming is totally natural, totally human, or some combination of both, nobody can say for sure because nobody knows. Even the scientists of the IPCC, if you get them in a corner, they will say, well, we don't know what percentage of the warming since the 80s up to roughly 18 years ago when the climate more or less began to stabilize, because it hasn't really gotten much warmer in the last 18 years. They will not be able to tell you, well, let's see, it's 45% natural and 55% anthropogenic. They don't know, and they can't say, I do think that there is a human contribution, which was probably the result of increasing the carbon dioxide concentrations from, 280 at the end of the last ice age parts per million down to about 350. But the thing you got to understand about carbon dioxide is that
plant life, no?
Yeah, yes. When you get down to a couple of hundred parts per million, you're talking about photosynthesis shutting down. And if you read the article I've got online, Redemption of the Beast, it's an extensive analysis of the carbon cycle. It's like 92 pages, and it's fully referenced going back a century or more, studies on the carbon cycle. And people need to read that and realize that this is one side of the story that nobody's hearing, and it's up online.
Better if you supplement
plants
CO2.
Absolutely grow better. Yes.
Well, my dad, I grew up in one of those houses where my dad liked to grow plants inside with these really big, bright lights.
Yeah.
And he used to bleed CO2 canisters into the room.
Yes.
And they would explode. They grew way faster, way bushier, way healthier.
Yes, and yes. So I really would encourage people to bite the bullet, go on there and read this entire article.
Where is that again?
It's an essay. It's called Redemption of the Beast. And beast is just a metaphor for carbon dioxide that I use because, carbon is 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. So it's kind of cool to think, here's a metaphor. The beast.
Almost like it's for a reason.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, let's go on and look at this graph because this graph really shows us some pretty dramatic things here. So now what we've seen is basically temperature changes over the last 10,000 years. And when we look at the vertical version of the graph, as you said, I think, Darren, you see it kind of sweeping over to the left as you get right to the bottom. Because what we're seeing there is the temperature coming out of the ice age, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that graph and I'm going to extend it down so you can begin to see what happens pre-Holocene.
Holy
Jesus.
Yeah. So, whoa. Yeah, that's an appropriate response right there. And what I'm trying to get people to realize is that whatever's driving the climate pre 10,000 years ago, we don't know. We don't know what that is. Now, here's one thing to consider. Is that carbon dioxide driving it? I don't think so.
Hell no.
No, it can't be. And even if it was, what that's implying is that there must be some gigantic reservoir source of carbon dioxide outgassing that we completely don't know about. If that's the case, then how can we say the science is settled? On the other hand, if it's not carbon dioxide, which I don't think it is that's driving that, we look at that graph and we go, how in the world can we say that the climate change debate is settled when we can't explain that degree of change?
I was not expecting that. When that hit the screen, Oh my God!
Yeah, because I was just thinking that I wanted to see that. I was going to ask him for what happened before.
I was thinking the same thing.
So you've got this huge variance as well from like 15,000 years ago to 100 and something thousand years ago, and then it even gets way hotter at that point. So I mean, it's just all over the place. I mean, look at how steady it's been actually over the last 10,000 years. Yeah,
you're right. It's all over the place.
It's
challenging anybody to, who thinks the science is settled to please explain that to me then, because you obviously know enough to say that the debate is over. So would you please explain that to me? I would like to know. I'm curious.
That picture in itself destroys their argument.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I've been able to come up with is that with all of those woolly mammoths farting, then perhaps that had something to do with it.
Definitely. What happened? Do you think they're around like 120,000 years ago? Would that be an impact as well?
I don't know.
That could have been Mount Toba. Maybe that was Mount Toba. Do you know where Mount Toba was on that?
It's about 72,000 years. And it's probably, if you come up, let's see. I'm going to swoop me.
Oh, yeah, that spike that goes up to like 0. It almost was warm enough to unfreeze water.
Yeah, I was reading.
Yeah, and then it goes back down again. There's like a big oscillation there just below, about halfway between 50,000 and 100,000. That's probably Toba right there. Would be my first
And are we
guess.
going off of Celsius or Fahrenheit here?
This is Celsius.
Okay.
So to get Fahrenheit, you multiply by 1.8.
And add 32.
Right. Yeah, so, and if we look at that, the last big spasm coming out of the Ice Age, you'll notice that there are two spikes there of warming spike. And let's see if I've got a 0, if I can hone in a little.
Yeah, I was reading this book. We're going to have a guest on next week about the into Africa theory as opposed to out of Africa, and he talks about Mount Toba and the changes around that, like the how it fucked up the Earth for weeks afterwards, actually longer than that.
Yeah.
And the sea level rises were incredible. I mean, it's just unbelievable the destruction from one eruption.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, clearly then what it shows us that there are natural forces that we have to contend with. Now, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
My mouse cursor. Okay. What I'm doing here is I'm looking here. This is the coming out of the Ice Age events, and you'll notice that right here, at about 14,600 years ago, there's a massive warming spike. You see that? I'm hovering over it with my mouse. Then it sawtooths back and forth back into full glacial cold. You'll notice here at about 20,000 years ago, you see it's kind of warming, and at the same time it's warming, the amplitude of those changes begins to decline somewhat.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, boom, you've got this huge warming spike. It sawtooths back into this period of full glacial cold. And then you have this second warming spike right here. It's almost like the first warming spike was not capable of kicking the planet out of the Ice Age, and it shot back into the full depth of cold, which is called the Younger Dryas. And then the second warming spike. I look at the flooding events as being associated with those two warming spikes. It just makes sense.
And the comet impact hitting something at the beginning of the first spike kind of to trigger the whole thing.
Yeah, we don't. There's no hard evidence showing an impact at 14.6, but I don't think anybody's really looked. The problem is that the impact proxies show up at 12,008 to 12,900 years ago, and that's right there where you see this where the graph just plummets off down into that spike of glacial cold off to the left. So at between 12,800 and 12,900 years ago, these independent teams have been finding impact proxies such as nanodiamonds, microspherules, magnetic grains. A platinum spike has been found in the Greenland ice core. Several of the sites have iridium spikes. So there's a number of these impact proxies that have been found. And
all over the planet, right?
well, not yet all over the planet, but all over North America, Europe, as far as in Syria, they've found a black mat, which is a transition, a younger Dryas transition period, and into Venezuela, Mexico. So it covers a large swath of the planet. But as has been said, no one really knows yet the extent of these materials. They could go beyond what they've already seen. It's just that as they keep extend the field of their investigations, they keep finding this stuff. And of course, it has triggered a major controversy because there are factions that do not want to suddenly take away the possibility that has been promoted for, decades now, that human beings hunted these great megafauna to extinction. We'll come back to that because these megafauna, Frank Hibben, anthropologist from the University of New Mexico back in the 40s and 50s, did extensive research. He was one of the early catastrophists who looked at the extinction level event at the end of the Pleistocene and concluded that it was a major catastrophic episode that happened. And his eyewitness testimony is quite compelling. What he did was he followed these gold miners who were using these high-pressure hydraulic hoses to blast away the permafrost muck up in Alaska, looking for gold veins. And what he was interested in was not so much the gold. He was interested in what kind of fossilized remains that was being uncovered as they blasted away the permafrost. And his eyewitness testimony is quite compelling. And wrote a book, I think it was called The Lost Americans, back in the 1940s, where he describes these remains. And it's so obviously some type of incredible catastrophe that exterminated many of these animals and left them frozen in the Alaskan muck. And it's clear from the descriptions that, they had nothing to do with human hunters. Because we're supposed to believe, again, that Paleo-Indian, small bands of roving Paleo-Indian hunters using spears and on foot were able to exterminate somewhere around 40 million animals, large animals, on 4 continents within a geological eye blink.
And then not eat them.
And then no, you couldn't have eaten them. I mean, how is you.
Exactly. Just waste it.
Well, it's pretty clear with that spike that on your graph, it correlates to that extinction, right? I mean, how could you not investigate that?
Right. The extinction happens between warming spike, the lower warming spike and the upper warming spike. The entire extinction episodes happens in between those two warming spikes. So now, there's this faction, like I said, that wants to completely discredit the idea that there could have been something outside Earth that could have been the trigger, right? Because, and here's the reason, is because we're now seeing a revival of this, what is called the human overkill hypothesis, which, and the reason for that is because there are factions now that are really promoting this idea that we're in the midst of the 6th great mass extinction in the history of the Earth, which we have certainly caused extinction of some species. Absolutely. I'm not arguing with that. But what I'm saying is that to say that we are now in a period of mass extinction equivalent to the late Ordovician or the late Devonian or the Triassic or the Permian Triassic or the Cretaceous Tertiary is just silly. It's nonsense, because when you begin looking at the circumstances associated with the 5 great mass extinctions in Earth history, if you take the middle of that spectrum, which is the KT boundary where the dinosaurs became extinct, you had, try to imagine what a 6-mile asteroid the size of Mount Everest slamming into the Earth at 10 to 20 times the speed of a rifle bullet, basically is lofting enough debris into the atmosphere to bring a shroud of darkness around the planet that would last for years, triggering global wildfires, the collapse of probably every fault line on Earth, the triggering of massive volcanic eruptions and outflowing of basaltic lava, and the extrusion of massive amounts of acidic pollution into the atmosphere, and then that followed by the onset of glacial cold in the dark. It's like, wait a second. The last time I looked outside, things were pretty nice. We weren't in the midst of a period of global wildfires, firestorms. We weren't experiencing a cosmic winter or months of endless darkness. So, to me, you just, wait a minute. You're comparing and saying now is comparable to what happened during the Cretaceous-Tertiary transition. I just, you don't further the cause by exaggerating so much, And again, obviously we have to learn how to live in harmony with this planet. Obviously we do. But we also have to understand that this planet has been able to take care of itself for millions of years, and even a small asteroid impact, which the planet has suffered countless thousands of times, is going to completely dwarf anything that humans have yet done. If you look at imagine, if you will, nuclear war using, if we had an all-out nuclear war back in the late 60s and early 70s when the nuclear arsenals of the superpowers were at their peak megatonnage, looking at about 12,000 megatons, right? And that would be, if we were to unleash those nuclear weapons, that would be a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions within history. It would clearly bring civilization to an end. Well, even one small asteroid is going to be thousands of times more powerful than every nuclear weapon in the arsenal detonated all at once. And the Earth has repeatedly suffered those kinds of impacts throughout its history. So, we have to have a context. When we start talking about change and what humans are doing to the planet, we have to have a perspective. And the perspective is this planet has managed to survive things that are a lot more severe than anything we have yet done. It's estimated that the KT impact might have released energies in the scale of 100 million megatons. 100 million megatons, for crying out loud. Do you have any idea what that means and what that would do to the environment and the planet? It's almost impossible to visualize. But basically what you're talking about is more than 1,000 times greater than the entire nuclear arsenal of the superpowers blown up all at once. So, again, we got to put this stuff in perspective and realize that the planet has amazing recuperative capabilities. There's just no other conclusion, because we now know that catastrophes on this scale have happened repeatedly in the history of the Earth. And my point is that what the fragile variable in this whole equation is human civilization. It would not take, if we go back and just look at that spike from 8,200 years ago, a spike like that of cooling would end civilization as we know it. And we don't know what drove that.
Right.
But what's likely is that it was probably the final draining of Lake Agassiz into the North Atlantic that triggered that. But once again, it was a completely natural phenomenon. It was part of this process of deglaciation. So
it's hard to believe that there was human beings surviving through that, past 10,000 years. When you look at that, that is just, it's almost impossible to believe that we even survived it. How old is the oldest skeleton that we know of?
Oldest modern skeletons, have been dated between 150 and 180,000 years old.
And they lived through that.
Yeah. So, yes. And here's the thing. It would be very difficult to establish any kind of a civilization when the planetary environment is doing this. But on the other hand, when you begin to realize the extent of the change that has been imposed on this planet, and you go back before that first warming spike, and you realize, as I've done by traveling, I've lost count, 50, 60, 70,000 miles I've logged up in the field over the last 20 years, documenting these evidence for catastrophic geomorphic change. And what you realize is that, whatever existed on the planet prior to this, lurching out of the ice age, we really wouldn't expect to find much of anything. When you're standing on a landscape and you're realizing, okay, in front of me is a chasm 10,000 or 1,000 feet deep, And this amount of bedrock was probably removed in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. So you're standing somewhere and you're realizing where I'm standing now, before this melting, was 500 or 1,000 feet below the surface of the ground. How can we say what was up on the surface of the ground before these events happened? We just don't know. And clearly, it brings up really interesting questions to me about the nature of human beings that were living during these times.
Yeah, when was Göbekli Tepe covered up? Can you point that out on that graph at all?
That would have been right
about
there.
the same time.
I mean, the dating of the plaster on the walls is right at 11,600 years. And that's basically right there where that second warming spike is.
Yeah.
Right there. Now, from what I've understand from discussions with Graham and in his book is that, there may be much older portions of the structure that have not been excavated or dated yet. So I'm just waiting to see what.
Oh, there's a lot they haven't even gotten to yet. They're trying to take their time, right? Do it correctly.
Yeah, I think so. So that'll be interesting to see if it does get much older than that.
And if you blew up, if you sort of zoomed in a little bit to more recent times, like the last 1,000 years, like or the Dark Ages and the medieval warming period, I mean, there's even some pretty recent changes that would make us sweat a little bit.
Yeah, and if you look there, I've just scrolled up a bit. If you look at where it's 1,000 years ago, come over to the left and then go down a little bit. What you're going to see is that there's that would be what's called the medieval warm period. You can see that the spikes are kind of on the right side of the green line, and then you see that they shift and they're almost predominantly below. I mean, on the left of the green line.
Yeah.
That was the first phase of the Little Ice Age. Then it got a little bit warm. There was a warming in the middle of the Little Ice Age, and then it kind of got cool again. And then right up at the end, you can see the 20th century warming. I think what I'll do is, since we brought up the question of the Little Ice Age, I am going to go to some interesting stuff here. Let's see.
See, that's the problem when they only talk about 180 years. I mean, all you have to do is go back a few hundred, and you're noticing huge shifts. So
huge shifts, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of paintings and etchings and wood carvings and stuff that were done during the Little Ice Age that show, the Thames River being frozen. They were having ice fairs on the Thames River that they can't have now because of the cold of the Little Ice Age. Showing here the frozen canals of Holland. I'm going to go to the next slide, and what you're going to see is the Mer de Glace, or Glace, in the Alps. And notice this you'll see down here on the right where my mouse is hovering. There's a cabin, a building. There's some people looking, and you'll see that the ice is filling this valley, almost reaching up to where this cabin or little house had been built. Okay, so now we'll go to the next one, and here's two images. One that was taken in the 1960s, and then the painting that goes back to the early 1800s, late 1700s. And what you're going to see is how much the ice had actually receded. You can, if you look at the arrows on the left image, they correspond with the arrows on the right image. And you can see, look at the upper arrow, and you can actually see a change in the coloration of the rock.
Yeah.
Right where my mouse is. Okay, well, that was the depth of the ice during the Little Ice Age. So it completely filled this valley. That's hundreds of feet deep right there. And then it's been receding since, from between like 1820 and 1850, the glaciers worldwide began receding after the depth of cold during the Little Ice Age. Go to the next one here. Let's see what we've got. Okay, here's Svalbard, Little Ice Age moraines. Now here you see this aerial shot, I think, was taken in the 70s. Now notice here, this is the moraine, which is the material, the terminal moraine that was deposited in front of the ice at its Little Ice Age maximum. And you can see very clearly here how much the ice has receded from where it was like during the 17 and early 1800s. It's pretty well confirmed that during the Little Ice Age, This was probably some of the coldest centuries of the last 10,000 years. The glaciers worldwide grew to some of the greatest extent that they've been since the end of the Little Ice Age. So, again, putting this in perspective, it's important to realize that when we're talking about global warming, our baseline is some of the coldest centuries of the last 10,000 years and some of the largest ice growth and ice accumulation of the last 10,000 years.
And people were not doing well at that time, too, right? Wasn't there, like, famines and...
Oh, yeah, there was... whenever we see, like when the first phase of the Little Ice Age came on, it was between 1320 and 1340. And what you had was a series of agricultural collapses, which brought on famine, which weakened people, weakened their immune systems. And then in 1342, you had the onset of the Justinian plague. Yeah. As a result of the cold. I think you can make a direct line between the cooling, the cold damp that came on, the succession of agricultural collapses, the food shortages that then ensued, the famine that followed that, the weakness that was brought on by people not getting enough nutrition, and then with the weakened people, you now had opportunistic diseases like the bubonic plague that was able to basically take over and wipe out a third of the population of Europe. And it took a good century and a half or 2 centuries, basically, to recover from that. And the Little Ice Age was broken in the middle by a period of a return to warmth, and then the second phase came on again. Luckily, we had progressed enough during that warm interval that we weren't as dramatically affected. But, you know, the potato famine in Ireland that killed so many people and triggered a massive emigration out of Ireland was clearly a consequence of the cooling of the Little Ice Age. If we go to the next slide here, you can see the village here, and you can see how massive the Mur de Glace is coming out of the mountain valleys there, swallowing up the trees. You see, and this was would have been around, I think, the early 1800s when this was, maybe late 1700s. Here's the Grindelwald Glacier, about 1775 to 1780. You can see coming down here out of the mountains, about to overrun this church. It is in the process of overrunning a village. Then in the next slide, which is 1966, it's the same valley. I'm toggling back and forth, but here what you see is that the glacier has receded all the way up where it extended down before. That's now forest growing in there, right in here. See, so all of that recession of glaciers took place between, like I said, between about 1780 and 1966. So what people need to understand is that the glacier recession isn't something that just started since we were driving SUVs. It's been ongoing for 200 years. Yeah. And it's just continued doing over the last 30 years what it had been doing over the previous 150 years, okay? It may have accelerated a bit, which could be basically just the fact that there is a lag between warming and cooling, and, you know, air temperatures are going to change, but the effects on the ground are not going to be instantaneous. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the Argentière Glacier as it appeared in 1780. You'll see that it's coming out of the mountain valley, about to encroach upon this little village here. And then in the next slide, which is a photograph taken in 1966, you'll see that the glacier is completely receded off to the left, where you see it right here on the right, on the left here. It's gone, and it's all you see is a line of moraine right there, which has not been reclaimed by forest yet.
Now, isn't there somewhere else on the globe that's getting more glaciers, like the Arctic or something? Isn't that growing? I mean, isn't that sort of a counter-argument as well?
Ice mass is growing, yes. That seems to be pretty well settled at this point, according to the according to the satellite surveys of the ice mass. Go to the next slide. You'll see there it is, about 1850. Now, it's just after this, and between 1850 and 1900, that we begin our first instrumental documentation of of climate change. If we toggle back and forth between these two, you see here's a sketch that somebody did showing the massive glacier during the Little Ice Age coming down, again, about to overrun this village. Then we see it in 1966. It's receded way back up here into the mountain valley. Forests are now growing where you saw the ice mass before. Go to the southern hemisphere. We got New Zealand. Here's the Franz Josef Glacier in the southern Alps of New Zealand, 1872. Right down here, I've got the mouse. You'll see this. There's a large boulder there, with most likely an erratic boulder or possibly something that has been exposed and denuded by the ice coming over. Okay, now look at the transition that we go through here as we come into the 20th century. I got a line there so you can kind of see 3,200 feet across. Here it is about 1905. Notice that same rock right here is now exposed. The glacier is receding. Now this is, again, before there's any significant fossil fuel contribution to the atmosphere by humans. And we go to the photograph of 1940, and you can see that the ice has receded immensely, and where in the first image, which you see here, there's now a lake in front of it. So this has been going on all over the world for the last 200 years. Glaciers have been in recession. And here's showing the recession. You can basically see, if you go all the way up here to the top, 1865, this was the height of the glacier depth. And then you can see by ages, here's 1907, 1930, 1950, it's here. 1965, it's all the way back up here. And really between 1940 and 1950 is when humans began burning significant amounts of fossil fuel. And nobody claims that prior to World War II that the amount of anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere was enough to cause major climate change, because it was negligible.
Right.
So, the point of this is that, this stuff, the question you got to ask is, what portion of this is natural and what portion of it is anthropogenic? And here you see that the blue line shows glacier shortening, the 180-year trend, which went up to the early part of the 21st century. And you see that blue line basically is a record of the glacial shortening. Then you have the angled black line, which is simply the trend line. And what you see is that the trend line has held quite steady since, around 1820. So when we get to that vertical dashed line represents, that now is the point at which humans are increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere to an extent that it could possibly affect the temperature. But what you see is that the glacier recession is continuing, doing basically what it had been doing for the previous century. So,
except for the end there, what was on the end there?
Which end up here?
Yeah.
It almost seems like it's
because
opposite.
right here. This represents that cooling period that I was talking about. That shifted again in the end, because during that cooling period, between 1945 roughly and 1970, glaciers actually started growing again.
It almost looks like it's the opposite in that access to these things like coal, oil, and gas are dependent on the temperature rising. Like, it looks like that spike is following the warming instead of vice versa.
Mm-hmm. It does. We'll go to the next graph. This is from Climate Variation, a Simple Geological Perspective, that was published in 2007 in Geology Today. And if we look at this graph, which goes back to the late Cretaceous, to about 70 million years ago, and here's departure from present-day temperature. And as we go back to the late Cretaceous, what you're going to see is plus 10 degrees centigrade. So the global average climate, based upon proxy measurements, was up to 10 degrees warmer than now. That dashed line represents right now, right? Okay, so now notice that it falls, or you see beginning of the Cenozoic era. It rises again, then it falls, and it rises. Start of Ice Age conditions during the Eocene. Then it makes this long, steady decline. You see glaciers begin to develop in Antarctica. It comes down to the early Miocene, and then there's a spike of warmth again during the mid to late Miocene. And then it begins to drop precipitously off. And then it begins to decline right down to what they're showing is about 1.6 million years ago. And then, boom, it drops down into this period called the Pleistocene, which is this right here, and the Quaternary Ice Ages. So, when you say, what's the normal temperature for the Earth? Well, then you got to then say, well, what time scale are you talking about? Because when you look at this going back 70 million years, then clearly the glacial cold that we've been in for the last 1.5 million years is the unusual temperature compared to all the rest of the time.
That's basically since the dinosaurs, right?
Here, the dinosaurs ended right here at this line where it says beginning of the Cenozoic era.
Right.
That's the end of the dinosaurs right there.
It almost looks like it's like a uniform pattern.
Mm-hmm. Well, the step ups definitely seem correlated well. So I wonder what it was like, for the last couple 100 million before the dinosaurs. Like, do you think it's always been that warmer?
No, there have been ice ages. In fact, during the Ordovician, there was a global ice age, probably colder than this one, and carbon dioxide was up to 3,000 and 4,000 parts per million.
Wow.
Which right there suggests, well, wait a second, if carbon dioxide is the sole driver of climate, then how do you explain that?
Yeah.
How do you explain that we were in an ice age in the Ordovician? This is an interesting graph because here you can kind of see there is a regular sort of oscillation. This is from way back in 1973 from Cesare Emiliani, Quaternary paleo temperatures and the duration of high temperature intervals. And it basically charts going back to 400,000 years ago down to the present. And you can see that for the last 400,000 years, the planet has been going into these troughs represent full glacial cold, and the peaks represent interglacial warmth. And right over here on the left is kind of where we're at now. This would have been the what's called the climatic optimum right here. I mean, this would have been the medieval warm period right here. Here was the last phase of the great ice age. So, yeah, what you see here is that it looks like there is kind of a quasi-periodicity to these changes.
So how often are those spikes?
It appears to be roughly about every 25 to 30,000 years.
Like right on a great
year. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh. So,
and Bill Nye doesn't know any of this. You need to step your game up, son. I don't even think he knows.
Probably doesn't even know what precession is.
He doesn't even know half the words Randall's using, probably. He doesn't know any of these things. It's so frustrating to see this guy he's given a mic and a loud voice and a big, huge audience just to tell them things, to lie to them because he doesn't know anything.
Yeah, but don't forget, Randall's audience on Rogan is bigger than anything Bill Nye's pulling on cable TV.
Yes. I know, but they're not the ones we have to worry about. We need to get the people who are all in, this is kind of the information you try to present to somebody, and they don't even want to look at it.
Right, they don't want
because
to
they've already got they're already brainwashed to believe that it's a lie. Like we're trying to lie to them. Randall, this information. If anyone tells you anything different, the conversation's over.
Mm-hmm. I think it's crumbling down a little bit now. I think things are shifting on a bunch of different areas, and man-made global warming being one of them. I really think the gig is up. It's the start. I think it's the start of the end for them.
Yeah, Randall needs a Netflix miniseries, just like Magical Egypt. We need to get Randall on a big, something with CGI, with visuals, something to get it out there to kind of battle against all this misinformation.
Yeah, and it's the thing is that again I'm gonna reiterate, humans are definitely influencing the climate. Yeah. There's no question, and we have influenced the climate by releasing, another 100 to 20 parts per million of carbon dioxide. If you read my article, The Redemption of the Beast, I make the case that it's really not such a bad thing that we have increased the amount of carbon dioxide a little bit in the atmosphere. In fact, it may be possible we've perhaps ameliorated the climate enough that we'll avoid another little ice age, which to me would be a great thing, because if we had another little ice age and we had 2 or 3 years of major agricultural collapses, we'd be in deep trouble. Even just a cooling of a couple of degrees centigrade, similar to what was occurring during the little ice age, could really bring on some serious trauma. Because even in America, our food supplies would run out in 6 months. If we had 2 years of major agricultural collapses in a row, we're in deep shit, people,
Well, Randall, what do you think?
And the thing about CO2 is it is plant food, and plants love CO2. And if you doubt that, then, I've got reference after reference after reference in this essay I've put online that people can read to get what is being said by a lot of bona fide scientists going back from 100 years down to the present time that is not getting publicized because it's getting lost in the clamor that humans are now the sole driver of climate change and that everything we're doing is bad, and therefore we have to have a whole new level of regulatory regime in place to control our behavior, because if we're allowed to be free, we're going to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
Look at Agenda 21.
The people that are now going to be in charge are somehow so much more moral and enlightened than the rest of us that if we just do what they say, everything's going to be fine.
Have you ever taken into account the intentional weather modification that's happening? Like, we talk about climate change and weather modification here quite a bit because they're doing it in China. They've done it in Russia, millions and millions of acres of cloud seeding and all this stuff that, I'm not even talking about chemtrails. I'm talking about geoengineering or weather modification. There's 50 programs in the States. Like, eventually that's got to start affecting things.
Graham is an all-in believer in chemtrails.
Come on, Darren. So have you ever thought about the impact of that?
Oh, yeah,
because they don't take that into account at all, right? There's a company out there that's been doing this for decades, weathermodification.inc, and you can buy them to create fucking clouds or rain or sun or whatever.
I just don't know. My initial thought would be that that's possibly a local or regional effect. I don't know if it's having a global effect.
Yeah.
Well, here's an easy one. Look what happened right after 9/11. Right after 9/11, right? When they put a freeze on flights, and they weren't allowing planes to fly in the atmosphere. Well, go look what happened. It got hotter for a couple days.
Or did it?
Only because there was no flights.
Interesting. I'll have to look at that.
Rogan even brought it up on his podcast a couple times. That the science showed that just the fact that there was a hold on flights after 9/11 for 3 days, the temperatures went up.
Okay. Well, and that's interesting because then it implies that the carbon dioxide emissions would have diminished from all the flights, right?
Oh, I think it would be the contrails.
Yeah.
The contrails blocking the sun from hitting the earth. You know what I mean? Like the fake little temporary clouds. Yeah. So the fact that wasn't happening and the skies weren't getting dulled. The sun was able to beat on us, so the temperatures change. So if that can happen just by the fact of them not flying for a couple of days, they also do it on purpose. Mm-hmm. China was doing it for the Olympics. Trying to clean the air.
I haven't looked into that to the extent, I've focused primarily on natural climate change and looking at, basically the research and evidence of the IPCC and the scenarios that they have been putting out. They don't really talk about geoengineering in that. So, but yeah, that's probably something I need to add to the list of things that I'm trying to learn about. But, still, I think in the big picture, it's probably of minimal influence relative to the big picture. I've got an interesting quote up on the screen right here now, which is one of the godfathers of modern climate scientists, Herman Sloan. I remember reading this back when it first came out back in 1979, and this was when that really, these are the kind of things that really got my hair standing on end. But he was talking about this, in the wake of looking at these new radiocarbon dates and realizing the pace of change. This is what Herman Sloan said. He said, from the viewpoint of the climatologist, the most important result of these investigations is the fact that within the human time scale of about 100 years or less, our climate is much more variable than hitherto assumed. Especially important and indeed disquieting is the evidence of abrupt coolings within warm interglacial periods, apparently as rare events with a recurrence interval of 10 to the fourth years. In other words, 10,000 years. So he's talking about, these massive climate changes that have occurred in less than 100 years. And of course, what we know now is that they happen in considerably less than 100 years. He went on to say that the problem of abrupt, intense coolings during an interglacial climate, similar to the present climate, resembles to some extent the Damocles sword hanging high above the globe and its inhabitants. Because of its possible consequences for the human race, its study deserves a much higher priority. Wow. Now, this was in 1979. So when, in the early 90s, when I heard that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change had been convened and we were going to undertake, this massive study into climate change, I thought, good, yeah, we need to know that. I had been thinking that for more than a decade since I had read this stuff in 1979. Well, within a couple of years, it became apparent to me, and then particularly even when I read the charter of the IPCC, that its mandate was to focus exclusively on anthropogenic climate change and to the exclusion of natural climate change. And so that's when I began to think, well, wait a second here. Now, I've been thinking and advocating, we need to understand exactly what Herman Sloan is talking about here, the problem of abrupt, intense coolings. And, of course, I would add to this natural cooling, such as we've seen in the paleoclimate record. But then natural climate change was just taken off the radar screen. And now you actually have people out there saying, humans are the sole cause of climate change. So what are you saying then? That all of these other factors that may have played a role are suddenly inoperative? Is that what you're saying? That you've taken the sun out of the equation, you've taken the geomagnetic field out of the equation, you've taken the Milankovitch cycles out of the equation, you've taken cosmic dust out of the equation, you've taken volcanism out of the equation, or at least you've said these things are so minimal that we don't need to think about them. And the only thing really driving climate change now is the anthropogenic influence. And I say, no, we can't assume that these natural forcings that we've seen reflected in all of these proxy reconstructions of paleoclimate have now some reason mysteriously ceased to operate. I think that could be a folly of biblical proportions. So,
weren't they saying, didn't they used to have an argument that the carbon dioxide was a different type, it was a polluted type or a modified type of CO2? I haven't heard that in quite a few years, but I feel like a decade ago or so they were plugging that argument.
Yeah, well, that's because the isotopic signature of carbon dioxide released through fossil fuel burning is different than the signature of natural carbon dioxide that's taken up and extruded during the photosynthetic cycle. However, the heat capturing capabilities of oxygen, of carbon dioxide 12, 13, and 14 are basically the same.
Right.
So, I really don't know if it means that much.
Yeah. Huh.
So then we get to jump up here to 1990. And what we see from studies of deep sea cores. The deep sea record shows evidence of abrupt climate change centered on the last deglaciation and resulting in a severe cold spell known as the Younger Dryas period. The origin of this climate catastrophe is not known. And it still isn't. And then a year later, we have this report that appeared in Science News. Ice records drilled previously indicate the climate can sometimes fluctuate with surprising speed. In particular, studies of the GISP-2 Greenland Ice Sheet Project 1 core, drilled from 1979 to 1981 in southeastern Greenland, suggest that the North Atlantic region warmed by a striking 7 degrees centigrade in a half a century. That drastic warming far outpaces what the world is currently experiencing. And then James White, who was one of the lead scientists on the study, said that really surprised us that things could happen so quickly. And yet I hear over and over and over again, in fact, Bill Nye, this is one of his constant refrains, is that, oh, well, the climate has never changed as fast as it's changing now.
Oh, geez.
Now, either the guy is completely dishonest or he's completely ignorant of this kind of research.
Probably a little of
I don't know
both.
which it is.
It's probably a little of both.
Probably a little of both. And then 2 years later, after they had learned even more from really detailed studies of ice cores, we find Richard Fairbanks of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory writing in the prestigious journal Nature, from measurements of annual ice layer thickness over the past 15,000 years, the authors find that Greenland's climate, emerging from the last ice age, twice shifted from glacial to interglacial conditions over an astonishingly quick 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
And we're talking here about 10 to 12 degrees centigrade, which is going to be 15, 18 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 to 5 years? I'm sorry, Bill Nye. You don't know what you're talking about when you say it's never happened this fast before. And he's not the only one that says that. You hear that over and over and over.
And the main thesis for the cause of these ice age is what? Right?
And say that again?
The main cause of what's putting us into these ice ages, right?
Well, that's the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's the mystery. That's the thing, we need to find out. And if all of the money is going towards exclusively anthropogenic climate change, we're not going to know. We're not going to know what the answer to that question is.
But most likely, we're getting pelted. And we were getting pelted a lot more frequently, according to your graph. We were getting hit with stuff all the time.
Well, see, that's the interesting, which brings up the next question is if I'm going to put out a theory as to what's driving the climate in that to that extent, I would say we probably are going to end up having to go outside to outside sources, exogenic sources, and realize that planet Earth is part of a much larger ecosystem that encompasses the entire solar system and beyond. And when I say the entire solar system, I'm including the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud in that. I'm including, solar variations. And here's another interesting point. The sun has been excluded from the models of global warming. They're saying, well, solar variability is too minuscule, so we can discount that, right? And so it's going to be solely carbon dioxide, right? So carbon dioxide's increased, 100 parts per million in the last century, let's say, just in round numbers, right? So if you have carbon dioxide increasing by 100 parts per million, and you realize that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere follows a declining logarithm or declining exponential curve, which means that every incremental increase in carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere only produces half as much as the previous incremental increase. What you basically are looking at is a curve that's declining towards zero with each, say, 50 to 100 parts per million increase. Most of the heat trapping capabilities of carbon dioxide, that capture of that 14, 15, 16 micron wavelength of infrared heat coming off of the Earth, most of that is already being captured by the first 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide, right? Certainly by the 200 parts per million. We could keep increasing the amount of carbon dioxide, but the amount of heat capturing is going to continue to just diminish with each incremental increase, because it's just like you could picture a sponge. You put a dry sponge on the table and you start adding water to it. It'll keep soaking up that water until it becomes saturated, and then what will happen is that the water will start flowing out of the sponge as fast as you put it in, right? Well, right now the atmosphere is near saturation in that most of the infrared heat in that particular wavelength emanating from the planetary surface is now being captured. Most of the heat that carbon dioxide can capture is now being captured. That's the thing. And that's another one of the issues that they don't talk about.
So you could almost argue that you need that CO2 holding that atmosphere, otherwise we degrade back into the ice age.
Yeah, and this, again, go back and read The Redemption of the Beast, because I cover what's going on in there, and the studies that have come out in the last decade or two showing that there are places around the planet, like major places around the planet, that are greening for the first time in living memory. And this was first realized, 20 years ago, and the discussion or debate was what's causing this greening. And what you see now is, if you follow the trend of the research, it's pretty much now concluded that it's predominantly the result of carbon dioxide fertilization. The plants are sucking up the extra carbon dioxide almost as fast as we put it into the atmosphere. And I've got showing studies in there where, if we increase just, a modest increase in the amount of forest coverage over the surface of the earth, and the biosphere is going to be sucking up that carbon dioxide as fast as we put it in. Now, again, I'm not saying here we need just completely, proliferated, carbon dioxide consumption, because I am very much an advocate of moving beyond a fossil fuel economy at some point. Mm-hmm. But again, it's all a matter of putting it into perspective.
We're going to have to use it until we can get there, though.
See, that's the thing. That's exactly right. Because what we have is we have an energy source now that's available. And in that, we need an energy source in order to make the transition. See? And again, I discussed that in this essay that I do hope people go on and read it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, I would like to tell people that they really, there's a video you did a while back for Geocosmic Rex video,
yeah,
where you go over that old alchemical drawing.
I'm not remembering which one that would be.
The one with the two-headed knight standing on top of the top of the dragon.
Yeah. Right.
That was a mind-blowing lecture.
Good.
That picture is that's something I keep on my phone just to show people and talk about it. And I would like to learn where I can get more information, because every time I look at that and I find a piece of, and typically it comes from things I've heard you say, and I go look at that picture and I'm just like, whoa, there's so much there that is just, like you said, like, we live on one badass planet. This planet is amazing, and we need to be as responsible as we possibly can. But one of those things is we need to, in order to protect it so we can survive here, maybe we should figure out how to defend it from outside forces.
Yeah, because even those long cycles that you're talking about 26,000 years, you were saying it could be, more. What did you say? Is more of the solar system, or not even including the Oort cloud and the Kuiper belt? Well, we could be going through a part of the galaxy every 26,000 years that's bombarding us and causing all this damage as well, and that could be some of the reason why. They knew back in Göbekli Tepe time or whatever, they knew that it was coming around again.
Yeah, I think that the idea is completely plausible, that there is a periodicity to exogenically driven planetary change. And this is a whole other topic of discussion. I think it's one of the most important discussions we can have at this point. Because, like almost on a monthly basis now, we're seeing stuff fly by the earth, where we're getting to realize, unlike a generation or two ago when we imagined we were just in this pristine, emptiness of space, we realize now that there are, hey, you know what? There's a lot of stuff out there flying by the Earth. And, the question is, are we just seeing it more often? Or is it actually increasing?
Yeah.
And the models that I'm looking at, and the research I've been doing suggests that the exogenic factor is being seriously downplayed. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't know, but it just seems like it's being de-emphasized because it could be a whole lot more significant player. I mean, going back to that famous 1908 Tunguska event, which to me was definitely a cosmic learning experience, and we're still deciphering the mysteries of that 1908 event, which was probably a member of the Taurid meteor shower, which interestingly has come up as a prime candidate for the possible impacts at the end of the last ice age, and has been found its way into a lot of mythology, during going back centuries. And I will be developing additional essays, and probably even the book I'm writing is going to get into some of that, showing the myths of the celestial bull and the slaying of the bull, particularly in some of the religions like Mithraism, which was one of the main competitors of early Christianity in the Roman Empire. And they have a whole scenario called the Tauroctony, which is based around the idea of the slaying of the bull. And of course, the slaying of the bull is Taurus, the bull. And, the Taurid meteor shower is so called because it's radiant. The point that it appears to be emanating from space is centered right on the shoulder of the bull. And in the Mithraic traditions, what you see is Mithras slaying the bull by driving a sword into his shoulder, which in the classical depictions of Taurus is exactly the radiant point of the Taurid meteor shower. And in
that quote earlier, you were talking about the sword in the sky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that? What was the name? Yeah.
The Sword of Damocles. It's from a Greek myth. You can look it up.
Yeah, it's just fascinating why we should have treated that last one that happened in Russia. That should have been a fire drill or like an earthquake drill. Yep. Remember you used to have to hide under your desk for because the Russians were coming.
Yeah.
The planet should be planning for this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's going to take a couple of more events. It may take, if that Tunguska, if we had a repeat of that now, and an event like that happened over a densely populated part of the globe.
Don't say Seattle.
That event, you're talking about 150 foot wide, roughly, piece of space debris flying into the Earth's atmosphere, exploding 5 miles up with the force of about a 12 to 15 megaton hydrogen bomb explosion. And that is enough to basically pretty much level any major metropolitan area in the world. Luckily, at the time, it was over a sparsely populated area of Siberia, right up there at the northern limit of the old-growth taiga forest. And it exploded and decimated, if you will, over 800, about 800, I think, 50 square miles of old-growth forest was just leveled. And if you look at any major metropolitan area, like in the U.S., like, say, Washington, D.C. or Atlanta, you look at a map of Washington, D.C., and you look at the perimeter highway, or you look at, like, Atlanta or New York, and you look, many of the big cities have perimeter highways around them. The area I've calculated is the area inside of 285, which is the perimeter freeway around Atlanta, is almost exactly the same size as the amount of devastation caused by the Tunguska blast of 1908. So, if you had just a small little speck of space debris like that come into the atmosphere and blow up over the eastern seaboard or over Europe or something, you'd potentially have millions of casualties.
Is that also going to...
That would be a wake-up call for the human species.
Yeah, and is that also going to come with an electromagnetic pulse at all as well? Now that we're all in the digital age and everything is electrical, like when Tunguska happened, we wouldn't have known the electric effect of that.
Yeah, I mean, it could certainly have EMP effects.
So even though it might destroy Atlanta, it could destroy the whole, North America with a pulse.
Show.
Yeah.
The telegraphers, the people running the telegraph machines, didn't people get electrocuted?
During Tunguska or the Carrington event?
That was the Carrington.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
That was strictly the solar flare, I think, or the solar maximum or whatever.
Oh, is that
there,
okay?
Mm-hmm. Which brings me back to a point I was about to make, and it won't take me a second, which is that the sun is discounted, and then basically carbon dioxide is considered the sole driver of climate change. But even those promoting that in the scientific community will admit that by itself, and in all of the computer models, well over a dozen, I think 15, 16, 17 computer models, basically what they do is they put in a whole bunch of positive feedback parameters. So you've got essentially the initial warming of the CO2 is admittedly not going to drive this catastrophic climate change. So you have to have positive feedbacks, which take the form of water in additional water vapor in the atmosphere, and water vapor is actually the most effective greenhouse gas. So, in other words, the slight warming caused by the carbon dioxide increase then causes more water vapor into the atmosphere, which captures more heat, and then that triggers this runaway warming. And so it's basically these hypotheticals feedback processes. But, of course, the thing is that, a lot of atmospheric physicists and meteorologists and stuff have said, well, more water vapor in the atmosphere means more clouds, and more clouds has a net cooling effect. So, maybe your series of positive feedbacks is irrelevant. But I find it interesting that they're totally willing to theorize that there is a series of feedbacks that amplifies the initial effect of carbon dioxide, but then they completely discount the possibility that there might be positive feedbacks related to the amount of solar radiation coming into the Earth. But again, that just suggests to me that, what you have here is a preordained outcome, and all of the science is basically oriented around this idea that humans are the cause of climate change, and then all of the things that then follow from that, which whether it's a carbon tax or cap and trade or, the control of energy resources by the governments, there's all kinds of agendas tied in with it. And now you have this whole industry, global warming industry, that's on the receiving end of literally of hundreds of millions of dollars. People talk about, Exxon was contributing money. Well, if you read the studies, what you find out is that Exxon contributed a total of about $19 million over a period of 10 years. And this was to over 30 groups, many of whom didn't even do climate change research. And if you extend this, average it to 30-some groups over 10 years, it works out to be about $65,000 per group on average, which would be enough to basically fund some mid-level employee for a year. But then, what did Obama do just before he left office? He gave the second installment to the Green Climate Fund of $500 billion, which, was the second installment. So here was $1 billion within the last year or two going towards this, conclusion that greenhouse warming is going to be catastrophic and it's caused by humans. And basically we need to implement all of these controls on human behavior. I'm all for. Listen, I'm totally for alternate forms of energy, and I want that to happen. But it's not going to happen if the government continues to confiscate hundreds of millions of dollars and put it towards a contrived catastrophe. I think that there will be free market solutions that will bring us to where we need to be a whole lot faster. And what we need is basically to hear all sides without the demonization and all the accusations and all of the ad hominem arguments. We need to say, we're saying, well, a lot of these guys that have raised issues about the so-called consensus are raising legitimate questions. And rather than marginalizing them and demonizing them and calling them names, we need basically an unbiased debate more than anything. what you find over and over ago then is that, the side that's promoting global warming doesn't want to debate. That's why they keep saying the debate's over. But the debate hasn't even begun yet. So how is it going to be over? So,
yeah.
Maybe the debate will start this year.
Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, do you have anybody that you would like to debate, Randall? Anybody specifically that you think you'd, I mean, not that they would, but if you could choose somebody.
Well, I think it would be really a lot of fun debate to debate Bill Nye, I have to confess. But
yeah.
That might be too easy.
I'll start tweeting him. Start egging him on.
Hey, why don't you see if you can get Bill on your show?
Yeah.
Well, we had somebody on talking about the planetary missions and stuff like that. Emily Lockdawala. She works for the same organization as him, so we had her on, and we didn't really talk about Bill at the time. So
what did you talk?
All the planetary explorations right now, all the different missions going out there. It was a pretty cool scientific chat just about all the global missions all over the galaxy right now, or not the galaxy, the solar system.
Yeah. Now, that's something I can completely get behind. Interestingly and ironic, I think that Bill Nye is also a big advocate of that.
Yeah, well, he is. Yeah, that's his whole planetary.org or whatever that organization is. He's the head dude there. So it's kind of a contradiction in a way.
It is. That's how I look at it. And I would say, Bill, I'm with you on this one, but on this issue, I'm totally behind the idea that we need to listen. If we could stop spending, $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion a year on war and spend it on the exploration and economic development of the solar system, wouldn't that be about 1 million times better?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And where's his experience to put him in a position like that? I
don't know.
Because he does what he's told. That's why.
But, all of these companies that are making the billions off of, preparing for World War III, hey, wouldn't you guys rather make the same amount of money, but by moving the human species, into the solar system and, putting us in a position where we're no longer vulnerable to these kinds of cosmically induced catastrophes? Wouldn't that work?
And for every dollar that we put into the NASA program, didn't it produce like $7 into the market?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I heard it was for every dollar we invested into NASA, it produced $7 because of all the things that were invented and commercialized, like Velcro.
Yeah.
Like Tang. It's
sticky notes.
It's almost like it really does feel like it's our purpose to get out there and explore it, but somebody doesn't want us to do it.
What it seems like, I believe it's our destiny. In fact, I would even go so far as to say this. I think that basically what we're going to see is that when we look at the history of life on this planet, what we see is a pattern of constant interruptions. The old uniform, gradualistic, Darwinian model of natural selection, incremental change through natural selection, playing out smoothly over millions of years, it's just not there anymore. In the older models, what you had was like at any given time, there's maybe 10% of existing species going extinct, being replaced by 10% of new species appearing and filling those vacated niches. But, that model is obsolete. The model now is that, life goes along just fine, and then all of a sudden it's interrupted, and 75 or 90% of all the species on the planet suddenly disappear. And then you've got this hiatus in there, and then suddenly these vacated niches are filled during these events called rapid speciation events, which we still don't know what causes that, really. Mm-hmm. I have a suspicion that the same factors or forces that cause the mass extinctions are also introducing catalysts into the biosphere that can trigger accelerated evolution. But that's
like the Cambrian explosion kind of thing?
Perhaps like the Cambrian explosion. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting that's come out of Russia post end of the Cold War was all their studies on the Tunguska site and accelerated mutations that have taken place in plants and animals in the region of the Tunguska blast. And so that's a very, very, to me, interesting area of research.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
The Russians have a lot of information that we don't have, I think.
Yeah. And this is why we need to be talking to the Russians instead of demonizing them, you know.
Or is that why they're being demonized?
Maybe so. Well, I think they're partially being demonized because, you know, they want to push this $1 trillion nuclear modernization. And it, you know, it's not going to go through unless we've got, you know, enemies to justify it. So, you know, basically what they're wanting to do is implement a first strike or preemptive strike capability. And that's what all the new generation of nuclear technology is designed to do. And I'm not sure if we need to go there. You know, I think we need to be sitting down with the Russians and saying, hey, look what happened to you back in February of 2014. That's going to happen again. And do we want to go toe-to-toe and become enemies again? Do we want to revive the Cold War? Or, hey, why don't we collaborate and cooperate on the exploration and economic development of space? Wouldn't that be a whole lot better?
Well, they're all in. We have to hitchhike with them now.
They are in. That's the irony here. They're in. But it's,
if we want to go to space now, we have to ride a Russian rocket.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And of course, you know, everything, all the signals we get from Russia is that, hey, yeah, we'd rather partner with you instead of, you know, and so then you've got basically this demonization, like, okay, they're not perfect. Putin is not the perfect angelic being. So therefore we will demonize him and demonize the Russians and everything to do their nefarious objectives or whatever. We'll demonize all of these people for purposes of basically establishing global hegemony. And, you know, is that really in America's best interest to try to become the policeman of the world? I don't think so, because it's going to be a never-ending process whose final end can only be catastrophe that we brought on ourselves, or because we're so preoccupied with stuff down here and with each other and trivia, something cosmic sneaks up on us and kicks our ass. And this is why I'm so disappointed in the left, because when I came of age back during the Vietnam War, the left was the primary advocate for free speech and free unfettered speech and anti-war. And now look at them. Look what the left is consumed with. You know, what bathroom we're going to use, and microaggressions and cultural appropriation and white privilege and all of this stuff that really amounts to absolutely nothing except a big distraction from the real stuff. So, I mean, I think the left has lost all credibility, and I'm just hoping that somebody on the progressive left finally says, wait a second, you know, our fundamental purpose and our best, the best that we were in the 20th century was when we took a stand against war, when we stood for free speech, regardless of what that speech was.
Well, the problem is
we weren't out there trying to shut down people who disagreed with us.
Yeah, and that's not an organic movement. That's the problem I have with it. It's intentional. Yeah. It's being pushed through certain agendas, and it's all part of, you know, trying to globalize the whole system here. So that's what's frustrating for me.
Yeah.
And now they're live action role playing as ISIS characters. It's like they shop at the same clothing store.
Yeah.
You know,
what's that all about?
They're ISIS LARPers. That's what they are.
That's good stuff.
I never thought about it like that. It does look similar.
Yeah, go look at the people have been doing the Photoshop of ISIS people, you know, standing on top of their trucks or whatever with those leftist flags.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, which one is this?
Hey, Randall, while we have a little bit of a break here, kind of a lull, do you want to talk about, do you want to mention your stuff again here, like what you guys are doing on your website, and you've got a sale on some of your DVDs and your classes? Can you describe a bit of that for us?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've got this a sale on the new Blu-ray, Cosmic Patterns and Cycles of, 4 or 5 hours of stuff, and it's got, you know, charts and graphs and, you know, video clips and high-resolution images. It's chock full of juicy stuff.
It's amazing. And I'm actually, that's why I asked you, since you have a Blu-ray now, I'm going to get it because I loaned my copy out a couple times, and this last time I didn't get it back.
Well, you get
So I'm
33%
gonna have
off.
to get.
Use coupon.
Yeah, I'm going to go get my 33%.
Yeah, for Grimerica, you're going to get a special deal. Just because of my good friend and how you guys put us up when we were, about to launch our last expedition up there.
Hey,
And what? There was 8 of us, and Darren put all 8 of us up in his house.
Yeah,
That was an awesome podcast. That was a fun one.
Wasn't that fun? That was a lot of fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
it sure was. And
Oh,
I
yeah,
would
we
like
just
to do it.
chatting in his garage till late hours, and it was great.
The real hero is my
Yeah.
wife for not killing us.
Yeah. So here I want to take this opportunity before millions and millions of people to say thank you to your wife.
Oh, yeah.
What you're listening? What, 400 or 500 million?
Getting there, yeah, about $500 million.
Getting there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about your classes, Randall? You've also got. I took one of those a couple. Oh, geez, it was probably a couple of years ago now.
Sacred geometry.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be doing podcasts because Cameron is, I'm here in the studio now. He's set up a whole studio here. So we're going to be taking some of these things that we've been talking about and a lot of other stuff. I've got tons and tons of material. And we're going to be putting together a series of podcasts. They're going to be short, little, easily digestible, like I said, 20 to 30-minute segments covering a variety of topics that we've been talking about here, and in a lot of things we haven't been talking about. And we're kind of coming up with a list, and if anybody out there has ideas, if you hear something that you find particularly interesting, you want to know more about it, you can make a suggestion and say, hey, I want to hear more about Mithraism, or I want to hear more about the Holy Grail, or I want to
Where
hear
do
more
I
about
send my list?
Word Cloud or whatever.
I have a long list, Randall.
Okay.
There's so many things I've heard you talk about that I don't hear the interviewers, they kind of just brush over it. And it's like, oh, no, go back. It's the one thing I don't like about podcasts, because I love it. I listen to about 10 hours a day of podcasts.
Uh-huh.
And the one thing is I'm not part of the conversation. Like right now, this is such an honor to be talking to you and hanging out with you guys on here. It's just like, there's so many things I've heard you bring up that I'm like, oh, wait a second. There's something more to what he just said. You're not even getting into it. So I was so stoked when I heard Cameron talking about the Gnosis podcast. It's just, I've been bugging him on Twitter about it too. He's like, it's coming. I'm like, I want it now.
Yeah, it's
you should tell people why they
raise
should
the funds to buy the equipment, and I'm still barely out of the red. My business got hit really hard by the recession, so I went from being relatively prosperous to being relatively poor, and I'm just now kind of coming out of that.
And that's Archetype.
Yeah, that's Archetype Builders, and Cameron's going to be putting up some of that stuff on the website.
Go check it out, guys. It's actually, Randall, you're good. You're really good at it. I dabbled in construction when I was younger, and yeah, it's really good, guys. Go check that out. But as far as like the sacred geometry, have you told people like why they should get those classes? Like what? Because I don't think that most people they hear it like maybe they don't know what it is, or they don't know what it might do for them, or what the experience they might be getting out of studying something like sacred geometry.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it's something I got interested in a long time ago in the early 70s when I discovered Buckminster Fuller's work. And I got commissioned. I was part of a group that we were doing a retreat in northern Minnesota, and me and my 2 younger brothers got recruited to be lead carpenters on building 2 geodesic domes, Fuller domes. So in order to be able to do that, I had to go and study geodesic geometry. And that's how I discovered Buckminster Fuller. And then that led me into the studies of geometry. And I discovered that, geometry was one of the common themes of all of this ancient, particularly sacred architecture. The term sacred geometry, I've seen people online, on some of the comment boards saying stuff like, well, Randall Carlson, he believes in sacred geometry. So that discounts anything else he might say, and of course they have no idea what sacred geometry is. they probably don't know, they probably wouldn't know, the Pythagorean theorem if it came up and kicked them in the ass. But, the thing is geometry has been around since the very dawn of recorded history. The Egyptians were major utilization of geometry. Basically all the ancient cultures. The megalithic cultures of Europe were using geometry linked with astronomy. The term actually, I've been able to trace in historical sense, was from the work of George Lesser, who was a early 20th century Freemason who studied the systems of geometry used in the building of the medieval ecclesiastical structures. So he was mainly looking at churches and cathedrals built during the Middle Ages and studying, because they were very much utilizing geometry. I mean, when you look at the ogival vault in a Gothic cathedral, it's pure geometry. You look at the floor plans and how they developed them. It's pure geometry. He called it sacred geometry because it was primarily being used in the design and construction of sacred structures. That is, structures that were ecclesiastical in nature. But then, it began to expand from there. There was another Hans Bruns, who was a Danish, again, a Freemason, who came along after Lesser and published a 2-volume set on ancient geometry and its uses. And he went back not only to the guilds of medieval builders, but back to the classical Greece, the building of the Greek temples and the geometry that they employed, and showed that there was a consistency between what the Greeks were doing and what the medieval ecclesiastical builders were doing. And then, you had people like John Michel and Keith Critchlow, who expanded it beyond that, showed that, at the height of the Islamic Empire, 9th, 10th, 11th century, when they were building these incredible mosques, they were using geometry and basically the same geometric principles that were being used by the Greeks, by the cathedral builders. And then, what both Critchlow and John Michel showed was that you could find the same geometry embedded in the megalithic structures of Europe. You had then scholars coming along showing similar geometries being used by the Mayans in the erection of their temples and cities in Central America. And then some of my own work and a few others have shown that that's entirely consistent with the monumental earthwork architecture in North America. The Mississippian culture, the Hopewellian culture, the Chacoan culture were all utilizing geometry and using geometry to not only to lay out the patterns of the ground plans of these structures and their elevations, but also to link it into astronomical patterns and astronomical movements. So it's a very, and then you've discovered that there's been scholarly research showing that, a lot of the artists, Renaissance artists, and really going back even to Greece, there was a secret system that was passed down that was using geometry to set up grids over which the paintings were laid, so that and I've got a PowerPoint show I've put together, and we maybe could do a podcast on this, showing how they set out some of these grids, and some of the great masterpieces of Renaissance art are superimposed upon these grids. Now, there's nothing woo-woo about any of this, but some of these mindless idiots that come on and make their comments who don't know anything, they're saying, I think even on the one of the wiki sites, somebody says, Randall Carlson, he's into that sacred geometry woo. Well, that's what all you're doing there is you're just basically confessing your stupidity before the world, because the study of geometry throughout history is a very complex, very sophisticated study, and it was utilized. There's no question about it. These people used geometry, and their systems that they used was primarily employed in the erection of structures that had a spiritual purpose. Therefore, the term sacred geometry, right? And there's nothing woo-woo about it. That's just in the imagination of these know-nothings that like to get on and spout off, thinking that somebody somewhere is going to be impressed because they can spout off and call somebody a name. But sacred geometry is really a powerful system. Then of course it goes from there because it's not limited to the
physical structures. Yeah.
Right. It also, you find it in nature, and it's embedded in all levels of nature, from the atomic and molecular levels up through, vegetation and plants, right up through the solar system and the structures of the galaxies. We find geometry, and it's a consistent geometry in the human anatomy. In the anatomy of living things, we find geometry. The golden section is probably the most famous of the principles of sacred geometry, and it's completely embedded or embodied in human anatomy. Anybody can take their forearm from elbow to fingertip, divide it in that special relationship, the golden ratio or the divine proportion, where you divide any length into two asymmetrical units, where the small is to the large in exact proportion as the large is to the sum of the two. And that's the golden section. And it's been somehow utilized by life processes over and over and over again. And anybody who looks at their forearm from elbow to fingertip, and then if you feel, anybody listening, try this, hold your forearm up in front of your face, feel around on your wrist, and you'll find this hollow space in your wrist called the space of Destot. And if you go from the fingertip of your longest finger to that space, that's your short increment. Then from that space to your elbow is the long increment, and it stands in exact relationship as the long increment does to your entire cubit or entire forearm. And then you hold up your index finger out in front of your face and look at the first digit from the tip of your finger to the first joint, and then look at the distance from the first joint to the second joint, and then from that joint to the knuckle. And that increase of expansion is following the golden the golden proportion. And then it goes from there. I mean, if you stand up against the wall, take your total height, divide your total height by your navel height, you'll find that proportion is embodied there as well. So, I mean, this is all geometrically demonstrable. And for somebody to dismiss it because they think it's something woo-woo is just, it's just their ignorance. That's all.
And and if you have somebody who doesn't follow that ratio, it sticks out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're like, well, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. Well, it's off. Well,
is that what's going on with Darren, do you think?
What the fuck?
I think, Darren, when I get back up there, I think we need to do a detailed analysis of your proportions.
Sounds good. Sounds kinky.
He's way taller than he sounds, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, when you're an infant that's born, your navel, basically the navel of a newborn infant divides the total body length basically in half. And then once you've reached adulthood, what you've essentially done, obviously, if you had a human being walking around at full growth that had the proportions of an infant, they would look really strange, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
But what happens is as you grow up, you're growing into the proportions of the golden section.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
if you take the average, if you add up,
yeah, I think what you're going for, Cyrus, is that everybody deviates a little bit, but if you start averaging lots and lots of people, the more data you have in your sample, the closer it's going to get to being right on the golden ratio, which is roughly 1.618033989 non-repeating.
And the more people you get involved, it's like we're all in this together, people. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. It's one of those things when I think about it, if I go too deep into it, it starts getting mind-bogglingly like it's all for us, It's there for us, and it definitely feels like it's something that's being kind of hidden from us on purpose. Mm-hmm. It's part of us. It's part of some kind of plan out there trying to keep the real information from us. And there's guys like you out there, and there isn't enough. There's not enough people like you out there, Randall, that are trying to get the good stuff out here. Because if you look at it, there's a systematic dumbing down of the education system.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. It just needs the whole thing needs to be blown up and restart. Because if you go look at junior high school text from over 100 years ago, if you give that book to a college student, they're not going to be able to do it.
Right.
And they were doing that in junior high.
Right. Yeah,
Even go read love letters from World War I that soldiers sent home, and then go read some. It's like, my dearest Clementine, I bestow upon you the greatest love. And you go read one from the Iraq War. It's like, yo, bitch, what's up?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's basically coming from a century of allowing government to run our education system. That's why I'm a strong advocate of the complete separation of government and education.
Yeah, and go look at the people who started it, guys. Go look at listeners out there. Go look at the people who started the education system and why.
Yeah.
The farther back you go, the Prussian education system, the pre-German Prussian education system is what we have now. It's not for making smart people. It's for making a
on that
class.
too.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we'll throw that in the show notes.
Hey, I need to take a quick 1-minute break.
Well,
Can you guys tell entertaining stories until I get back?
Yeah, we could probably wrap it up.
But just talk about you.
And we can go on for another 15 or 20 minutes. I just need to take a break.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll be right back. Okay.
Tell us a story, Cyrus.
Oh, I'm really enjoying myself, guys. Thank you so much for having me on and letting me listen.
No problem.
Like, I was more than willing to turn my microphone off and just participate in the eargasm and the oral, the visual aids. Yeah, people, go watch this video on YouTube. You got to see this.
Well,
stuff.
not only that, he has the classes, right? The 4 or 5. He has the 4 or 5 classes going on. 4 or 5 hours worth of sacred geometry classes too, right?
Yes,
so
and there's
that's
you
pretty
can find
intense.
some stuff on his website. You need to go to Sacred Geometry International, the website, and trust me when I say that there is so much information on there. And if you do the face bags, if you're on the face bags, go sign up for Sacred Geometry on Facebook. You're going to see some fantastic articles, fun things to read, and then Cameron has some people on there that are amazing artists.
Absolutely.
You're going to see some fascinating stuff. And if you studied sacred geometry, which I'm starting in, and I think I'm going to go buy that stuff tonight, the rest of it, you'll. If you don't understand sacred geometry, you're not getting that much out of it. It's not only is the art beautiful, but it's actually meaningful. But you need to understand what the artist is saying.
Absolutely. Nice one, Cyrus. That was perfect.
Yeah, good job. Are you back, Randall? Or?
No, can't you see?
Oh, what?
The empty chair.
Oh, that's what that is.
If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
The blah, blah.
Sending out good vibes.
Yeah.
Good vibes. Good vibes. Good vibes.
108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that.
If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
That's why I support
Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, man, I got to get an ISO of that.
I don't remember.
Have you guys ever watched the videos on the Geocosmic Rex YouTube channel? that Randall has from old lectures and stuff?
Yeah, there's one actually there that I think you can see me in the background of at the Big Rock, jumping around like an asshole.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's a lot of lectures that he does down there in Atlantis, Georgia.
Atlantis. That was on purpose?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
That's what it was named after, right?
Is it? I'd have to
From my understanding. But I might be wrong.
I'll take your word for it for now. Till I hear otherwise.
Actually, I bet you Randall knows.
Okay, just got back in time to hear, I bet Randall knows.
Oh, I called Atlanta Atlantis. And I did it on purpose.
I've wondered about that over the years, and I'm not sure if I know what that connection is.
Darn.
Yeah, right. Sorry to disappoint
you. There's too much out there for everyone to know everything, but you're coming pretty close, Randall.
I estimated the other day, I think there's 4 things left that I don't know.
Well, didn't you start you made it a rule to read a scientific journal a day, right? Like a long time ago.
Article. A minimum of 1, yeah.
A minimum.
Sometimes 2, sometimes 3, depends, how complicated it is and how long it is, 3 or 4.
And how long have you been doing that for?
Pardon me?
And how long have you been doing that for?
Oh, gosh. Since, the mid-'70s, I guess.
40 years.
Yeah, so I've
40 plus years.
Yeah, I mean, in my archives, I've got thousands of articles. And, and I haven't read every one, but I could say I've read the abstracts of every single one, so I know what's in them. And, if I need to, I can kind of go. I've got them all in binders, chronologically ordered by subject. And of course, now, with the Internet, there's so much you can do on there. And I have borrowing privileges, at a major university, so I have access to that. And then there's Google Scholar, and there's ResearchGate, and if you go onto the websites of a lot of the principals doing research in various areas, they will have links to their articles. So, yeah, I mean, it's incredible how much information is out there now, and it's just too bad that we're getting inundated with this trivia and bullshit, that people get so consumed with that is of no consequence whatsoever to our future, other than serving as a distraction from the things we really need to be paying attention to.
And what's the definition of gnosis? Can you tell the listeners
that's the Greek term. It basically means knowledge. And in the early days of Christianity, there was Gnostic Christianity, which was basically suppressed with the rise of the authoritarian church. And the difference was the authoritarian church, the Holy Roman Empire, Church of the Holy Roman Empire, basically said if you want to have a relationship with God, you can only do so through the intermediary of the authoritarian church. And basically, they realized that they could use fear to, subjugate people to submission. And whereas Gnostics, the early first 2 century Gnostics their attitude was, well, no, you can have a direct relationship with God. You don't need the intermediation of the authoritarian church.
They wanted to put God in a box.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So and remember, last time God was in a box, you couldn't come anywhere near him.
Yeah. So that was the gnosis. The gnosis basically means knowledge, and knowledge of both things seen and unseen. And, so that's kind of where, it's a very useful, broad term to kind of cover what we're trying to do with it.
Do you have access to the Vatican's library? That's what I want.
Yeah, I was in there this morning.
Yeah,
shuffling around. No, I don't.
Were you the one who slipped that letter about that took the that basically said that the Pope wrote a letter during the time of the Templars, basically saying that they never did commit blasphemy and all that stuff?
Oh.
It's like, you guys have that in there and you never, it was just your secretary found it on accident one day? What else do you got in there? I want to know. What books did you steal out of the Library of Alexandria?
Yeah.
You have any of those?
But see, yeah, and you bring up a good point, Cyrus. It's the, through the centuries and the millennium, the amount of information and knowledge that has been lost is almost inconceivable. Both through deliberate suppression and both just the vagaries of time. The great Alexandrian Library of Egypt, had 400,000 volumes of ancient works in there that was destroyed. The Library of Carthage, very similar.
They wanted every book in the world in there, right?
Yeah.
So they would step above aboard your ship, looking for books.
Yeah.
And if you either gave it to them or you allowed them time to copy it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then all of that's lost.
Yeah, let's burn it.
Can you imagine what might have been in those volumes? And this is why I say over and over again, no, look, we can't make any hard and fast conclusions about ancient history because there's so little. There's been so much that's been lost. And, it's just so convenient and easy to come up with this sort of exponential curve of civilization, from thousands and thousands of years of barbarism and pre-scientific illiteracy and, basically hunter-gatherers. And then somewhere, within the last 500 years post-Renaissance, we begin on this upward arc, and now we're at the peak of civilization. And,
quit holding us back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're holding us back. You just let us rip. Let us go.
Sure.
We got stuff to do.
Yeah. And I think the real model, not only of, I was kind of getting to this point earlier, is that now the model of life on this planet is one of it's a sawtooth model. Mm-hmm. Species proliferate, they come to a peak, and then suddenly it's interrupted, and the number of species drops. And this is the biological model. It's basically being accepted. Stephen Jay Gould, who coined the term punctuated equilibrium to describe this process. Well, I think the next level of insight that needs to evolve and is evolving is recognizing that the model of civilization is basically mimics that of life as a whole. It's sawtooth rather than this smooth ascending curve. And that just as species have become extinct, civilizations have become extinct. And we really do need to understand that process if we're not going to fall victim to it ourselves.
Well, the thing is that there are groups of people who have this information and they keep it to themselves. They let their kids learn it, but they're not going to let your kids learn it. You know what I mean? And I have 3 boys, and they're going to public schools, and this Common Core crap is unfathomable to me. Like they are trying to ruin math. 2 + 2 = 5. No, it does not.
Yeah, I mean it's almost humorous.
Never will.
Really. But you just think about the term itself, Common Core, the idea that you have to have one system imposed from the top down on everybody. And that's not what we need. We need true diversity. And this is why I've been a homeschooling activist for about 20 years. I taught a lot of classes, tutoring to kids that were being homeschooled, and it was really an eye-opening experience for me to see the difference between kids that were being indoctrinated in public schools and what that did to their love of learning, and then seeing kids that were being homeschooled that basically, look, you can learn whatever you want to learn. It's wide open. What do you love to do? That's what you're going to learn about.
Hey, my kids are getting homeschooled. Will you give them some online Skype courses?
Yeah, I mean, good for you, Darren. Good for you. Yeah, that's nice, Darren. Could you imagine having Randall as a
I'm going to call you up, Randall, and get you to give him a couple of courses.
Sure. Well, you get the geometry course. It's basically a drawing course, and most kids love it. And, when I taught geometry for 15 years, and mostly what I would start math courses by having the kids draw. And it was really, for the first few months, it was more like an art class. And I would take them through the principles of geometric construction. Show them, here's how you erect perpendicular lines. Here's parallel lines. Here's, how you can create an equilateral triangle. Here's how you create a square. Here's a pentagon and other polygons. And here's the relationships in them. Now that you've drawn this right triangle, let's study the three sides and their relationships. And it's not something that's totally abstract because they've just finished drawing these images. And they would have, like, at the end of a course, after, 9 months, they would have a whole drawing book filled with diagrams and patterns and stuff that they had drawn. And then from there, I would segue into the more abstract. Well, look, here's a right triangle, and let's call it sides A, B, and C. And now when we say A squared plus B squared equals C squared, it relates directly to this drawing that they had just done. And then basically I take them through that curriculum of geometric drawing and then use that to segue into the higher math. Because it all starts with geometry, basically everything, no matter, getting into the higher levels of, differential calculus or integral calculus, it all ultimately traces back to geometry and some fairly simple geometric principles. And the thing about math is math, if there's any subject that you need to go at an individual pace, it's math. And this is why, again, in the public school system, it completely fails because they basically get a room full of 25 or 30 kids and they have one pace. And out of that 25 or 30 kids, maybe there's 3 of them where that's the optimum pace. For some of them, it's too slow. They get bored and quit paying attention. For most of them, it's going to be too fast, and you move on before they've grasped the basics. And that's where math gets so frustrating. If you take it one principle at a time, and it's targeted to the individual's optimum learning speed, you can get it. Anybody can get it. But I go, okay, so you've got kids coming out of high school now that have spent 12 years in this government educational system. They can barely read. They can barely write. They don't know math. They don't know history. And so, that 12 years has been completely wasted. And in fact, really all it's done is bring them into a place where they can, get with their peers and basically go for the lowest common denominator.
Well, that and the government can raise them,
Might
right?
as well have been sewing sweat shoes.
Yeah, and if you look at history, and what you see is that throughout all of cultures in history, you see that once a kid reaches adolescence, it's time to start integrating them into the adult world and being treated like a young adult, not a perpetual kid. But now what you have, when you look at these butterflies, these snowflakes, in college, it's like, hey, wait a second, you guys aren't 6 years old. You're supposed, by the time you get 20, 21 years old, you're supposed to be an individual that can stand on your own 2 feet and can take it. What the hell is this business about safe spaces? Because somebody's going to present an idea that traumatizes you? This is a byproduct of the government running the education in this country,
Now I feel triggered.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I triggered you, Cyrus.
Okay, I'm going to go get my color crayons. I'll be right back.
Warning.
What's happened is colleges now aren't like places where you're really challenged. They've turned into this glorified romper room.
Well, I know this might not be a good comparison, but Rogan's always talking about domestic pigs and wild pigs, right? Mm-hmm. We're basically keeping the kids at a baby state, right? We're not allowing them to grow.
Right.
We're not allowing them to become what they're what nature is intended for them. Kind of like when a domestic pig gets fertilized, it physically changes. Its brain changes. It becomes what it was meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we're holding our kids back by overprotecting them. Mom and dad, the family, they're trying to kill the family dynamics. By mom and dad both have to work while our kids go get raised by the liberal education system, because you can't even be part of the education system unless you are a liberal and you're on not a liberal, but really, farther left the better. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If you want to get into a PhD program, you're probably not going to get accepted if you're not having the same beliefs as the professors there. So these are the people that are teaching your kids, and I've heard politicians say that it is the government's job to raise your kids. The parents serve a secondary purpose. And that's not true.
No, that's not true. And people who buy into that really need to take a time out and do some serious thinking about this matter. Because
when I was growing up in the 80s, they wanted me to tattle on my parents.
Yeah.
With the DARE program.
Yeah, exactly.
If you see something, say something.
Yeah, exactly. When I was growing up, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1951, so I was a kid of the 50s and basically an adolescent and a teenager of the 60s. But I look back, and I realized, God, the things that we would do. I'd be 13 years old. I'd go with my younger brothers or some of my buddies, and we lived in a rural environment in Minnesota. And I'd say, well, we're going camping for the night, and my dad would say, well, just be careful, and I'll see you tomorrow. And off we'd go. We'd pitch a tent, we'd build a fire, we'd cook food out there in the woods and camp out. I started working on a farm when I was 13, hauling in hay bales.
Me too.
Mending fences, shocking sugar cane, all of this stuff. And the main reason I would do that is because it wasn't for the $2 a day. It was because at the end of the workday, we could saddle up the horses and go riding.
Nice.
But, we lived on a lake. I had a canoe. We had bicycles. I never wore a helmet. I probably would now. Of course I would now. But, somehow we survived, And I knew we had reached a nadir here when about 5 or 6 years ago I was going to do a series of classes in a building that was being used as a after-school program on the main floor. And then there was an upstairs room that was kind of a classroom. So I did a series of classes in that upstairs room. Well, the first time I go there, the parking lot was in the back, and you went through a fence, and then there was the play area for the after school kids. And as I'm going in, I noticed something there. There's some trees in the back there, and they were wrapped in foam. And I had noticed that a couple of weeks. And then finally I asked the lady, I said, why are those trees wrapped in foam? And she says, oh, that's a city requirement. We couldn't open until we wrapped the trees in foam to keep the kids from getting injured.
Nerf the world.
And I thought, yeah. I thought, what? What? At first, no, you're joking, right? No, I'm dead serious. They wouldn't let me open until I wrapped the trees in foam.
We need to bring back lawn darts.
Lawn darts, yeah.
I remember lawn darts. When I think of it now, it is pretty fucked up, though. I bet you a lot of people went down with a lawn dart in the back or the shoulder that I could just, But
yeah, I went to high school in Troy, Montana. So I moved out there from Seattle, and it's a whole nother life. I got to experience things out there that I'd never got to experience here.
Sure.
What it does for your soul to be out there getting dirty, talking your friends into doing dumb stuff.
Yep.
Jumping off of cliffs.
But the other thing is we learned how to get along with different ages and different people, and leaders would happen, and we'd have to play with everybody. Stefan Molyneux did a great podcast about the difference between growing up then and now. We had so many challenges we had to sort out on our own.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, when I was 15, I worked, as a pump jockey in a gas station, right? So I was the guy when the cars pulled in, I would come out and, pump the gas and, check under the hood, check the oil, check the fluids and all of this. When I was 15, and now, at least here in Georgia, they don't even let 16-year-olds pump gas even. They'll have a sign right there on the gas pump, 16-year-olds and under can't pump gas. And it's just every day I get reminded of this dumbing down that's going on.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And, we all survived. I came from a family with 4 and then later 5 brothers, and we were roused about rough and tumble boys that played as hard as you could play and did stuff. We all survived, somehow every once in a while we got a few injuries here and there, and, I look back and I knew some kids growing up that did some dumb, really, really dumb things and, didn't survive. But it was interesting in that, like when I was a little kid, there was a boy named Billy who lived nearby, and his older brother they were going to burn some trash, and he thought he was going to throw some, I don't remember exactly, but he threw some gas on the fire, and it exploded, and poor Billy, who was my age, got burned up and died a couple of weeks later. But for the rest of our lives, it was almost like every kid I knew around that area had heard about what happened to Billy. And it was like, hey, you better not mess with that. You remember what happened to Billy? And it was almost like I look back and I kind of think, well, that one kid having that thing happen taught all the rest of us, that. And another example is that one time where I was with my dad and we were driving through the Ozarks and we came around the corner, seconds after this horrible multi-car crash had happened. My dad stopped to see if he could render some help. I don't remember if he could do anything, but remember getting out and looking at, bodies laying on the pavement. And I think I was about 12 or so at the time. And somebody now would say, oh, that's awful. You shouldn't let your kids see something like that. But you know what? It made such an impression on me that once I started driving, I had that image in my mind. And I thought,
yeah, exactly.
To myself,
what if the parents spent all their time hiding that from people?
Yeah. So, you're not doing kids any favor by over sheltering them, and it's just too bad that we've gotten to the point now, like you said, where, families are basically the family unit is being undermined by policy. And, the government is taking a much more active role in raising these kids to just basically submit to authority. That's what it's about. That's the whole purpose of modern education. It's about inculcating submission to authority.
And control, yeah.
And control. And when you see them coming in, when I was a kid, like in 6th grade, I was a new kid in school and moved from Louisiana back to Minnesota over Christmas vacation. Enrolled in a new school after Christmas vacation, and immediately I became the target of one of the supposed toughest kids in the school. Thought he would elevate his status by beating up the new kid.
A Louisiana boy?
Challenged me to a fight, and we met after school and had a fight. Of course, I whooped his ass. But while I had him down, it was winter in Minnesota, and so I had him down on the ground and was making him eat snow. And the next thing you know, I'm being pulled off him by a cop that was driving by because there was like 100 kids all around us in a big crowd screaming their lungs off. Cop stops, pulls me off, makes us get up, and then he makes us shake hands and go home. Now, if that happened, we'd both been handcuffed,
jail,
and arrested. Yeah.
And that's how you see that kid that got arrested.
Thing it's become
fucking tased in the face.
Yeah. It's nuts. So, we could go on and on and on with stories like this, and that's why we need some serious changes in this society of ours. And, the respect, I've lost all respect for the left because, when I was, 18, 19 years old and, out there marching against the Vietnam War, I was out there with the progressive left. So we're basically ending the war, promoting free speech, and, even though as I came to learn about their philosophy and their collective ideas of how the economy is supposed to work and stuff, I quickly rejected that. But nonetheless, they still had a measure of respect. And now I'm looking, where is the anti-war sentiment from? And where is the sentiment for free, unfettered speech coming from the so-called progressive left? It's missing in action totally. And I'm hoping that there's somebody there who's going, yeah, you know what? We're ramping up for World War III right now. That's what we're doing. All of these policies being put in place is moving us towards World War III. And by God, we better start doing something to change the direction here.
Yeah.
Because we managed to avoid nuclear catastrophe in the first Cold War. We might not be so lucky the second time around, especially when you have people up there who think that a preemptive strike might be viable.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that's as good a spot as any to wrap it up.
We didn't even get into the Holy Grail.
No, we didn't. Well,
I'll have to
there's a
save
lot
that
there.
for part 6.
Yeah, listeners, go read that article on Sacred Geometry International. It's one of my favorite things I've ever read. And I'm going to go read here, I've already got it copied onto my phone. So it's a 4-part article about the beast?
Yeah, I think Cameron broke it up into 4 parts. It's
Okay.
also on Geocosmic Rex as well. I think it's in PDF form on there.
Yeah, go check out Geocosmic Rex. Go to the YouTube channel, Geocosmic Rex. There is some awesome stuff and some little tasters in there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff. Check out there's 2 YouTube clips of the drone footage we did our trip last fall.
Yeah.
It's just awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. You can see it.
Earlier, I was talking about that big current ripple field. We have drone footage of that, and people can look at that online and see for themselves the scale of the phenomena we're talking about here.
Yeah, it looks like it looks like the riverbanks after a real hard rain or a flood, and you got the ripples on the side, and take that and exponentially just grow it up to just hills and hills and just spreading out all through the countryside. It's insane.
Yeah, it is.
So you guys also
If you
take.
haven't heard the last 4 episodes with Randall, make sure you check them out. I know it was
Yeah, go back.
129 and 131, and the other 2 were before we started numbering them.
They'll all be in the show notes.
Yeah.
And then, so Randall, you guys also accept donations too, right? So people can go to your site, buy your DVDs. They get 33% off with Grimerica. They can check out classes there as well, and they can just donate to help you guys out as well.
We expect at least 50 of you fuckers to buy the DVDs.
And also, we try to do, once I was doing 2 and 3 research trips every year, and then that slowed down when the recession, but I'm picking up the pace again. And so I'm always looking for team members who want to participate in the field studies and the research and exploring these amazing landscapes. So that's something to consider.
I'm in.
Who said that?
Cyrus,
all right, man.
I got a truck.
It'll be your Sherpa.
You guys, I can haul everything you need.
Okay. Well, you're in Seattle now, right?
Yeah, I'm right off of I-90.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump over the mountains, and then you're basically into the scab lands.
Yes, sir. We go dirt bike riding in Moses Lake all the time.
Oh, do you really? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We just
grew up in the potholes.
We stayed in Cheney, right? We stayed in Cheney in October.
Yeah, we stayed in Cheney. That's where the cabin was.
Yeah.
So I drove one of the listeners. He's a fan of yours too. Adam Loyal from the Friends to Know podcast. I picked him up in SeaTac, and we drove all the way out to Cheney. I'm like, dude, check this out. And I started pointing it out, and he's like, whoa. I'm like, yeah, this is the stuff Randall's always talking about, dude. I wish we would have had time to go up to Cooley.
Yeah, we went to Cooley with Brad. That's where I lost my hat.
Yeah.
You mean Grand Coulee?
Grand Coulee, yeah. We went right up to the Dry Falls.
Yeah, that's awesome. In fact,
I think we only missed you
Dry
by
Falls,
like 8 hours or something like that.
What's that?
I think we only missed you by like 8 hours.
Yeah, I think so.
And I couldn't get off work.
Well, yeah. So I'm planning a trip actually in about a month to the Southwest, and I think we got room for 1 or 2. Basically, because one guy had to cancel because of his schedule change at work. And then later in the summer, hope to be up there near you guys. If you look at I'm going to put one more image up on the screen for people to look at. Dry Falls Cataract from the air. Okay. And you'll see one alcove. And then I've got Horseshoe Falls of Niagara up in the corner at the same scale. So, and basically we're only looking at one alcove, and this feature we're looking at here is over 5 miles wide, 400 feet high. The volume of water pouring over this was about 400 feet deep, moving at 60 miles an hour and just ripping the shit out of this landscape.
And that's to scale. Look how much bigger.
Yeah.
That would have been.
It's huge. You wouldn't even see the little boats that would be down there fishing.
That's ridiculous.
No, yeah, right. You wouldn't even see the boats.
That little
So,
Randall, do you have that picture?
The left is the one that I was climbing over when I lost my hat.
There's Darren's hat down there.
There it is. Make America great
there,
again. I see it.
yeah.
The ironic thing is I probably just lost that hat like 2 days after that footage.
Yeah. Actually, this footage was, well, let's see. I took this photograph in 1998.
Oh, that was just...
Oh, that's not the drone.
I think you were still in diapers then, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Randall, do you have that picture to show the people who are able to watch this on YouTube? The one, the potholes one, the Moses Lake?
You mean
the mudslide? The one that freaked Rogan out. Is that? I don't know if you have that on there.
Did Brad ever post the video?
I have it on my phone.
That fucking army plane ducking down into the coulee any place?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's up. Actually, that clip is up on the Geocosmic site.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about Potholes Cataract.
Yes.
Yeah, I probably have it right here. Let's see.
Right. Oh, no, that's not it.
Dry Falls. It's one of the big cataract complexes out there. And, yeah, this was the first drone footage that Brad did. Let's see if I can find it here. Coming up. Yeah, that's...
Wasn't there a Google Earth picture, a satellite picture of that slide?
Yes. Yeah, we had a Google Earth. Okay, if we look at this image right here, this is called Quincy Basin, and this entire area was a temporary holding pond for the floodwaters that came out of Grand Coulee up here.
Mm-hmm.
This is Moses Lake, which was a meander of the very final draining of the great floods. But over here on the western rim, you see there are two spillover channels. This is the one you're talking about, Potholes Cataract, and this is Frenchman Springs. And so basically there was so much water that came down here, even though it gushed over this region down on the lower right, which is 10 miles wide. The water flowing through here was 10 miles wide and 400 feet deep. And then over here, it had to raise 400 feet minimum in order to spill over this ridge. But this Potholes Cataract is where we've got the drone footage up on the Geocosmic website. And I think I've got should have it right here. Here we go. So here is the Google Earth image of the cataract. And you can see here you've got alcoves, extinct alcoves. There's two great alcoves here that are these horseshoe-shaped features. Mm-hmm. And then you've got what's called a rock blade, the central rock thing that separates the two alcoves. And had the flood continued to spill over for, a matter of a few more days or another week or two, that rock blade would have been gone. You can see here's a U.S. Geological Survey map of the feature. If you look at these round lakes, those are the potholes. And basically what you're looking at here is water that was perhaps 600 feet deep and enormous, extreme turbulence in that water. Literally,
like a tornado of just water and rocks and boulders.
Like an underwater tornado that just sweeps up rocks and debris and then acts like a giant circular drill that just bores its way into the bedrock. So here you can see the water came from the right, spilling over the rim, in the left down into the Columbia Basin. Here's an aerial photograph I took of the feature back in '98.
Just ground away.
It's what?
Just ground up by boulders the size of school buses. And
the size of school buses and even bigger. The drone footage we took.
Graham's calves. That's an inside joke.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I've got the... well, I didn't have the drone picture in this particular slide.
But look at
just
that.
Below it, here you see what's called West Bar, which is another gigantic boulder bar. It's 3 miles long, 200 to 300 feet thick, and it's gigantic ripples. And if you look very close, you'll see right there where my mouse cursor is, there's a 3-story building next to the landing strip that's on this thing scale. And this is similar to the same scale as the feature Camas Prairie that I showed you earlier that's in Montana. This particular feature is in Washington. But basically what it does is it shows you the vast extent of this mega flooding that terminated the end of the last ice age. So these are giant current ripple fields. Here, the cross section where you can see there's a little human figure standing down here, and you can see you can see the ripples here. And then essentially you see that cliff that was sheared off by the massive 800 feet deep water that flowed through at its peak.
Like the Sphinx, that's not wind, people.
Right. No, it's not wind. So, yeah, I mean, we could go on and on. We could spend the whole discussion just talking about these amazing floods that terminated the last ice age, but I guess we do need to wrap it up here, don't we?
Right on. Well, thanks, Randall. Yeah, I mean, you'll get into all that in your podcast, I'm sure, too. It's going to be so nice to see you having your own media platform to start getting to people directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people need to know about this.
Yeah.
This is part of the history, and this isn't something that we're looking at that happened millions of years ago. It happened thousands of years ago during the time that there were human beings here. And, we didn't talk about this at all, but Native Americans have a lot of stories and legends about gigantic floods that happened. And we can actually learn a lot from these indigenous traditions and from the mythic traditions and so forth.
There's so much stuff that they know that would be kept from. Yeah,
that's the subject of geomythology, which again, I've seen, comments, dismissing, what's geomythology? More woo-woo, but really what it is, it's the recognition that a lot of these myths and legends and things that have come down to us actually have plausible scientific information embedded in them if you know how to kind of pry them apart and look into the essence of what initially stimulated the recurrence of these myths and their perpetuation. They're loaded with information, legitimate information. So that's... And
these so-called experts, how can they call themselves experts if they haven't looked at everything?
Right. And I get that all the time, like, what do the experts say? And I go...
You're talking to one.
Okay, who might these experts be? Now, I've got in my archives, I've got every article that's ever been written on impacts, on mega floods, on mass extinctions. I can name off 100 of the experts that have worked on this, pros, cons, all the different points of view. So who are these experts? Please give me some names. If there's some that I haven't heard of, I'd like to go access their information. But, people seem to think, again, it's this authoritarian mindset. They don't realize that science is really, it's a state of mind. It's an approach to learning. It's only secondarily a profession. And modern science was not started by quote unquote professional scientists. It was started by people who were using the scientific method, but who themselves nobody was paying them to do science like now. And see, there's the problem, And it seems, well, sure, you can have corrupt science if big corporations are paying you, but you can also and do have corrupt science when the funding is coming from governments, So you have to look through that. And it's like this authoritarian mindset. I see all the time people going, well, what do the real scientists think? Well, who are these real scientists that you're talking about? You can't even name one. You just, in your imagination, you think that there's some omniscient authoritarian body that's got all the answers figured out. And, if they're not this official group, then, you don't even have to pay any attention to it. Never mind if you've studied this stuff for 40 years and have interacted and learned from dozens of hardcore scientists that are astronomers and geologists and paleontologists and archaeologists, people that I've met and interviewed and gone out in the field with, So, but it's an evasive maneuver so that people can, not rise to the responsibility of looking at the critical information. They can basically go about their lives with their heads stuck up their asses and not pay attention.
And they just get away with going 97%.
Yeah. And I say, okay, who
98%.
Name three of these people that are in total agreement. And
99%.
So far, not once has anybody able to actually do that.
Yeah.
So all of these people out there that are listening, don't fall for the scams and the hypes. Think on your own, learn critical thinking skills, invest the time, do the homework yourself. And,
Randall, do you know the name Scott Adams?
Scott Adams.
I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He created that comic strip Dilbert.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's what I've seen.
Have you heard him talk about the climate change?
No, I haven't.
Guys, I wonder if we should get them in contact. Because
I can't even fucking get in contact with Scott Adams.
How are we going to do that?
Dude, he goes up against the models, the global climate models, and he's battling it, and he talks about how, the way they set it up is to get a determined outcome.
Yes.
And I think if he had access to like your kind of research, I think that would be a big help for him on his side.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But he's got a huge audience.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've been trying to get him to get in contact with Grimerica too. But yeah, he's got a pretty big following. But he's got a really nice blog that he does that we follow. If you feel like it, go check it out.
Sure.
All right.
We'll do that.
Thanks, Cyrus.
Yeah.
Thanks, Randall. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
it was
thanks
fun.
to both of you. We'll do this again in the future. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm sure I'll be crossing paths with you guys. We can hang out in the mountains again.
Yeah,
God,
right on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What happens in the mountains stays in the mountains.
Yep.
All right. Okay, to see you guys.
Okay.
So long, gentlemen.
Bye.
Thank you, Randall.
And that was our chat with Randall Carlson. Big thanks to Randall and Cyrus for coming on the show. Of course, guys, check out grimerica.ca/support so you can see how we can keep having these long-ass, uninterrupted chats, talking about stuff that's important and you're not going to hear anyplace else. And the only reason we can have these chats is because we're not beholden to anybody but you.
Yep. No time frames, no advertising. Yep. And now we're putting video up there for.
The only way they can come after us is to kill us.
Yeah.
All right, guys, check out grimerica.ca/support and support the show if you can. I think we'll keep it at that since this show has probably gone nearly 4 hours already.
Yep.
Okay, guys, see you next week.
Bye. Bye.